One, yeah, we're live.
Okay. Alright.
So yeah, I always find that the first part of I'm bad with introductions. So
That's okay, right? I mean, it took me a while for me to really get into the habit of going like, "Hey, welcome to the rooftop. It's me, Noona, right? Like your morally bankrupt older sister from the roofs, right?" So like getting into this whole VTubing thing and getting into this whole like um yeah, getting into this whole streaming business, and I mean, it's not even as if I'm like that successful of a streamer, but it has helped me sort of formulate and get into habits of like trying to introduce myself in certain ways, right? Because a lot of it is just like broadcasting. Broadcasting itself is a skill, right? Broadcasting
yeah,
itself is this sort of idea of continually providing information and words without providing too much dead air. And I feel as if trying to patch up a lot of that dead air with interesting commentary is like it's a skill that's really difficult to do, right? And like introducing yourself in such a way where you are a brand, right? But you also don't want to separate a little too much from your own personality or who you are. Or maybe I'm just looking into it a little too deep. What I'm trying to like this is just like schizophilosophy at this point.
it's pretty deep. You know what? Just write an article on it. Someone will publish it. I'm speaking from experience over there.
Yeah. I feel like it's kind of funny that like we have gotten to a point in like internet culture that because like you know what you know irony, right? Irony poisoning, right? We live in this sort of era of satire and sort of sarcasm that everything is meant to sort of be ironic, or everything has sort of become irony poisoned, that there is no such thing as sincerity anymore. And like I think one of the biggest progenitors of like a person who talks about this really commonly is this YouTuber I really like called JReg. But his entire channel is based around just schizophrenic, ironic humor that is meant to sort of bait and switch and always subvert your expectations. And it's under so many layers of irony that it comes back to, wait, what the fuck? And then, but he just like rambles on and on about how irony is all fucked and how there's multiple layers to it. And it's sort of interesting because like that is sort of the video, that is the channel that has sort of become associated with explaining multiple layers of irony. And sort of that level of schizo philosophy has sort of become, he has pretty much become the father of like modern schizo like irony, which is sort of weird to think about because like other YouTubers would cite him as sort of a major source of their thinking.
So he's become what he's for to destroy. In a way,
Yeah, pretty much.
that's how it would. It's a wild world.
Yeah.
I was just telling Nupik at this point that I won't be surprised if aliens attack us by the end of the year.
If we lose the what?
I won't be surprised if aliens attack us by the end of the year.
Yeah, honestly, like every time I open up my phone and there's always like a headline, I always feel like I'm reading The Onion because of
Yeah.
just how like, bizarre everything is.
Yeah, like there was one video. I don't know how many years ago. I think about 2 years ago. Apparently, there's a ball testing booth in New Zealand.
A ball testing. Wait.
Booth. Okay, so I think I'm phrasing it in the wrong way. It's more of a doctor checks if you have testicular cancer through a glory hole.
Huh.
I'm like, am I watching am I watching a respectable news outlet, or is this the Onion?
Oh my god, that's really fucking funny. Oh man, I don't know, man. I mean, it's the same. I feel like that's sort of the same thing that happens whenever you deal with like research papers related to like sexual organs or anything of the sort like that. Because I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, okay, so like I've worked on like a few graduate papers before. I wasn't a graduate student, but like I've worked on a few graduate papers, and like I've read through a bunch of research papers and stuff like that. And like the validity of research papers in general has always been up in question. It's silly, it's stupid, it's questionable at best.
As
Right?
as an author of said papers, I can agree.
Yeah, right. Because like a lot of it is just like, all right, we do an experiment, right? We're trying to find some results, trying to make some sort of like cause and effect, relationship between what we do and what we get, and and then at the very end, there's just like, all right, here's why this experiment might not be valid, and it's like, okay, first off, human confirmation bias, and then you have, it turns into, oh, it doesn't really work because correlation does not really equal causation. It's like, doesn't that like ruin the whole fucking point of this? I have read a few papers like that, and I'm just like, why? Your experiment sucks.
See, the entire point of experiments is think about the academic, languages. It's mostly bullshit. I'll be honest, it's mostly bullshit. As a like, you have to prove the obvious. Like, you need citations for 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah, right. I mean, because like it's weird because like we live in this like point in like the zeitgeist of like society where we have to like essentially fact check every single thing, and it's I feel like fact checking isn't exactly like a solution to the problem, but rather a symptom of something greater, right? Like we're dealing with a lot of post truth nowadays, and like it's interesting to think about how truth has become so butchered over the course of whatever, right? You need citations for virtually everything, right? And it's because there's so much different interpretations of pretty much anything, right? Ranging anywhere from research papers to, I don't know, fucking like news stories, right?
So thing about research papers is like, I live in what's basically Mexico. What would happen if Mexico and Spain had a twisted love child? Okay, and the thing about research over here, especially if you go into, let's say, archaeology or something along those lines, is the papers are wild.
Yeah.
Now, the paper, when I say wild, I don't mean wild and the speculation, like, they speculate stuff out, but they're like, you have guys here claiming the ancient Indians went to space. I'm like, no, dude, no.
I mean, what is it? So, like, I'm okay. So I know you live in, a country that has a lot of reverence for, religion, right?
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily have anything against religion in general because I grew up in a very Christian environment. So, it's sort of one of those things where it's like, okay, have an open mind about it, but don't shove it down people's throats. I mean, I know that's like a very American perspective on it, right? Because I know in some other countries it's either do or die.
That's how it puts. Over here, it depends on where you live, more or less.
Yeah, right. So, I guess thinking about it, when I think about like religion, sometimes there are always the far-fetched, like very bizarre interpretations of how like the world was created. Scientology definitely comes to mind of like.
No. Avoid the S word. They sue a lot.
Oh, okay.
They sue, or worse, they may do another Operation Snowflake on us.
Okay, well that's not good. All right, I'll avoid the Tom Cruise word. Got it.
Yeah.
At this point, I've realized that I probably just shouldn't say like any.
The thing is, see, the two people we have to avoid. That's one Susan, the other one's the guys that Tom Cruise works with.
That's fair. Okay.
Okay, we'll just call them South Park.
Yeah. It really does feel like. I mean, yeah. I guess South Park would probably be the best explanation of it. But like having an interpretation of the world that is focused entirely on, just like aliens, how they came to be, like how. I guess that's like always like interesting thinking about like the creation myth and how people really come to believe in them, right? Like, I remember because I remember being at church, right, and I remember, one of my Bible study teachers was this really intelligent guy. He was this really successful lawyer, and he was just a really smart guy altogether.
Okay.
Just talking with him, you could tell that he was very well read. And then after that, I remember we got to a point where we started talking about the creation myth, and then he completely threw evolution out the window. And I'm just sitting here like, man, but like science and literally evolution, and you could see it in real time, right? With like bugs and generations of generations, how they change over time to improve as a species.
So the thing is, Noona, many people have a bias. And humans as species, we don't change our minds.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, that's actually one of those things that I actually wanted to like mention on this entire because like you mentioned that like one of the things you wanted to cover today was like one of the things you wanted to cover today was um sorry, hold on, I'm deleting something. Okay. One of the things you wanted to cover today was like, firearms and like firearm engineering and the sort,
Yeah.
right? And like, yeah, I know there's a lot of people out there that aren't really super comfortable with, say, firearms, and that's totally okay, right? Like they are dangerous in a sense, right? They can be used to kill people, but in the same vein that and to me, like I view it in the same way that you use a knife, right? Knife is a very efficient tool, right? And but it can also be used to hurt a lot of people. But like I guess like the thing is that I don't want to change anyone's mind, I guess, because there's plenty of people out there that are very like anti-gun, right? There's a lot of people that are on the fence. There's a lot of people that's pro-gun, and it's a very like American sort of American centric sort of like way of thinking, especially because the nation itself was founded on
And the
dangerous
right to
living.
own guns.
Right? Yeah, right. The right to bear arms, right? So, like, I know that there's a lot of people that aren't exactly super comfortable with it. I do think it's an interesting topic, but I'm also not here to really change anyone's mind. There's plenty of people, Europeans, right, that don't really like the prospect of firearms in general. But like,
So the thing about Europeans is it depends on which country.
yeah, it also depends on which country, right?
Yeah.
Like Finnish people, right? Danish people are pretty okay with it. Swiss people are okay
No,
with it. But like,
the thing about Europeans I noticed is countries with conscription, they're cool with guns. So it's
yeah,
I'll say it's a case of them not understanding how firearms work. Like you're not
yeah,
exposed
yeah.
to it. So
Well, yeah, right. Like that's. I mean, I guess that's everything that you might fear, right? It's you fear the unknown, right? And there's a lot of people out there that are extremely ignorant with how firearms operate and how firearms just exist in general, right? Like I literally have a 22 long rifle handgun sitting on my desk right now. I have a unloaded shotgun and an unloaded AK, literally like leaning on my couch. Right? I have a half built AR in like the corner of my dining room. Like it's funny thinking about this and like people will be like, wait, what the fuck? Like you just leave those laying around? It's like it's my home. Like what do you want me to do?
yeah, as long as you don't have kids at your home, it's fine.
Well, yeah, right. Like I don't have kids. I mean, yet, right? Like that's sort of the plan maybe in like 5, 6 years. But it's sort of like different worlds for a lot of people, a lot of different like thinking. Hello, Swallows Unboxing from Koki's chat.
Oh, that's Sky.
Oh, okay.
Oh, hi, Sky.
Oh, that's hi Sky. But yeah, I guess like it is like different cultures, different worlds, and I guess like I just want to put out the disclaimer that I'm not here to really change anyone's mind if they're like vehemently anti-gun because I already know because I've talked to brick walls before. It's like it's not a fun process because it's just like rather like this is more meant to be like I guess if we do talk about it, it's I'd rather it be more like educational about how
Yeah.
firearms maybe operate or sort of like the history of them and sort of I guess like what makes it interesting thinking about why like how the military how military sort of design firearms over time and I guess like thinking about just I guess like shining a little light on them because like Hollywood gets so many things wrong. Video games always get so many things wrong, right? I've met people who think that they're firearm enthusiasts because they've played like Girls Frontline or something once or twice.
Okay,
And,
Girls Frontline doesn't count. Call of Duty, maybe. Girls Frontline doesn't
yeah,
count. That's a gotcha game.
yeah, well, yeah, no, that's like the joke. But like, I remember, I remember meeting a lot of people in university who are like unironic weebs, and like they would tell me like, oh yeah, like I'm a firearm enthusiast. I'm like, okay, so do you want to own any? And it's like, yeah, but like I don't believe in like this and that, and I'm like, like policy wise, and then I'll look at them and be like, so you're not really that much of an enthusiast. Like, why do you say that? And they go like, I play Girls Frontline. And I'm like, that means nothing to me. You play gotcha. So I don't know, man.
In a way, Girls Frontline did something that no one else could have. They made guns fuckable.
Yeah, that's very true, right? I mean, there are some people on the internet that have I mean, it's a little not safe for work. I don't know if I should say it.
Yeah,
Here,
it's fine.
but
It's fine. The reason I chose this time is most of the kids that watch me would be asleep by now.
yeah, that's fair. All right. But like, I think what's funny about that is, so I do like browsing a lot of what is it?
Artwork.
4chan image boards. Yeah,
Artwork.
no, that's not artwork. But like, there's a lot of posts that I go through, and like, that's just the internet, just endless amounts of trite information that really is pointless. But like, occasionally I find like the thread where there's people that are really fucking stupid. And then there's one who posts a picture of, him having his ball sack stuck in like the bolt of a gun.
Wait, what?
And he's just, yeah, no, pretty much, right? Like he pretty much put his genitals a little too close and it got stuck. And by a little too close, I mean he would stick it into the action of a firearm. Yeah. And then after that, he would be like, "Hey, yeah, it's stuck. I need help." And then there would actually be like an anon or two, a user or two, who would just like respond with like, "Hey, yeah, this is how you get out of it." And then everyone's just like, "How do you know this?" And he responds with, "Because I've done this before."
Wait, what?
Yeah, right. It's just like,
Wait, what do you mean you've done this before?
yeah, right. It's just like being one of the what is it? It's just like entering one of those weird spaces where people have, mentality wise, like people have gone into like weird, weird zones of just like, why do you do this? Why are you like this? The fact that someone has repeated this is like, huh?
And now this looks like a story might be from The Onion.
The Onion. Yeah, right. But like, I don't know. Having seen pictures of,
I believe you that I believe that's the truth. Cause
yeah,
because I've heard of a case where a guy stuck it in a vacuum cleaner.
yeah. No, that's very true, right? I mean, I don't know. Guys are weird. Guys are horny creatures. They want to stick their dicks in everything, whether it be a car exhaust pipe or a vacuum cleaner. Don't worry about it. I don't know, man. It's a funky situation, but like, it is always really funny seeing some people get really stupid with the things that they do. But hey, you know what? You know what they say? Something amosexual. I think that's the derogatory
okay.
insult that some people use.
Wait, I've heard of autosexual. That's for vehicles. So wait, man. So isn't it supposed to be something else? Because amosexual implies that they're attracted towards the ammo, not the firearm.
I don't know, man. That's just like it's. I remember there was like a lexicon. So like in America, there's obviously like people on the fence, but there's there's obviously the outspoken pro-gun crowd, which ranges from pretty stupid idiots who spout the same shit over and over again, and pretty well-read individuals who want to communicate. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of anti-gun people, ranging from suburban white moms that are really aggressive and very angry and kind of say the same things over and over again, and the well-read people who would try to have a dialogue, but ultimately at the end of the day come to the conclusion that they just don't like firearms, right? But like, it is funny that like both sides at the lowest level, you have a lot of people try to generalize and blanket statement, like insult other people. That's just how things work, right? It's the same thing with like it's the same thing with like yeah, anything else, right? It's the same thing with like people who are really fall into the like the MAGA, like Trump sort of thing, going like they'll look at a person and be like, "You're a liberal," right? It's just, or it's like calling what is it? It's like calling a Nazi a kraut, right? And it's just like yeah, like or if you called me like a Korean, right? It's just like yeah, I am. Like what are you trying to get at? I don't know. Name calling is weird. Name calling is very funny and strange.
That's what one considers an insult, the other one considers a compliment.
Yeah.
In a way.
So I mean, at this point, there's people that like took it and just like, all right, this is now a fun little term to call myself.
And yeah, funny thing, like I discovered the word gay, like associated with, let's say, gay men.
Yeah.
Was something similar to that.
Mm-hmm. So
apparently, gay was an insult towards gay men, which I found amusing. So gay implies happiness, and this is the most British way to insult a person. And I'll just put it out there. So pursuit of happiness, as in gay, and pursuit of quote unquote unethical happiness equal to gay. I'm like, that's too much work. No one's gonna think that much.
Yeah. Right. It's funny because like I don't know, man. Gay. It's like I've always wondered why like gay was supposed to be an insult at some point, right? And obviously, like it relates to the homosexual the aspect of gay, right? But
Yeah.
like I don't know, it's a term used to denote happiness. I don't understand how that could possibly be I don't
Okay.
understand how that could possibly be an insult.
Okay, back in the ye old days when people spoke posh, apparently gay was short for pursuit of what call that ungodly happiness.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like,
Well,
I just found it a few days back. I'm like, this is too much work. No one's gonna think that much.
yeah, yeah. I mean, at this point, I'm just sort of sitting here. We live in a godless world. Something, something, Frederick Nietzsche. I don't know. Oh boy. But yeah, it's funny thinking about how like firearm history has sort of been around for the past like almost 800 years since like honestly like the 1100s once like the Chinese discovered like gunpowder and stuff like that. So it is sort of interesting thinking about how like people revere like swords throughout history, right? Going so far as to really enjoy how different empires had different arsenals over the years, right? Like the Greeks used, I think it was the Greeks using like short swords.
Yeah.
They're all like made of, I think it was brass or
Yeah. It was broad in the middle.
yeah,
And brass.
it was brass broadsword, right? And then like people would really revere like katanas or other Japanese swords during like the Meiji era, right? And how that sort of became a staple in Japanese culture over time. And like it's interesting to think about how firearm technology and firearm innovation has sort of become uh, it has a long and enduring history, right? Maybe not as long as swords because obviously technology had to progress to a certain point, but it's interesting to think about how we are in this weird metamorphosis where people actively don't like the tools that people use to effectively kill each other.
Nah, it's more of how but like it's like say, back in the day when swords were a thing. Like okay, but right now we tend to glorify the past.
Right, that's
Yeah,
very true.
so swords back in the day, peasants or no, let's say people who didn't have access to swords would have faced swords, but they didn't have a way of communicating their point of view.
Yeah, that's also very true, right? And I guess with the internet, like now everybody has a soapbox to sort of
Yeah.
yell their opinion, right? And that sort of ends up creating, people in their own individual communities. So, like, I totally get that, right? And now that like local news, and other things across the world, across like the world, uh, you can just have any narrative that you create, and you could probably have some people follow it, and that's kind of depressing. But I guess that does end up making sense, a lot more sense, right? I'm pretty sure there's going to be detractors of swords and knives when back in the day as well, back in like I don't know the year 700. So,
We
but yeah, I
should
don't
ban
know.
swords. Swords kill people.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Like knives and swords are tools that have been used to kill, but they're also efficient tools for a lot of other things, like skinning animals and you know other stuff, like a makeshift screwdriver. It's actually
I don't think they had screws back then.
yeah, I know, but like thinking about it nowadays, like the utility of a knife is pretty universal, ranging
Yeah.
anywhere from a dangerous tool that can use to stab people to cutting your fruit to skinning an animal, because food is important and clothes are important, right? To I don't know, makeshift screwdriver, cutting boxes open. It's like it's interesting because I've met a lot of people, right? A lot of outdoorsmen, a lot of people in the U.S. that carry a pocket knife with them, right? Because
Yeah.
it's just a useful tool to have. And especially like if you live in like especially if you work like a labor job too, because I know plenty of people who work like blue collar jobs like that are just like I just have a switchblade with me just so I can like open boxes, right? And then like I've talked to people from like England, and then they'll be like, "Why do you need to carry a knife?" And I'm like, "Because it's a useful tool."
Okay, so like in the defense of the Brits, like I understand their take on this because they have a knife epidemic.
Oh yeah, in the same vein that we have a shooting people epidemic, right? Which is sort of it's so yeah, I don't know, man. I think like I mean, that's always like the thing with violence in any sort of thing. You can't necessarily blame whatever tool is being used. It's never it's never, banning a tool is never the solution. It's a symptom of something greater, right?
That's
And
true.
there's a lot of socioeconomic factors in the US right now that lead down the weird, like, whirlpool of just like the downward spiral of just like problems that the US faces, right? Ranging anywhere from city gentrification and the way that city infrastructure is already laid out to ensure that there's always a ghetto to, have poor communities, right? They are inherently like built in such a way where there is a disparity between rich and poor, right? There's an overwhelming sense of, US healthcare is obviously joked about, but it really is that bad, right?
Yeah, I
There's a lot of
understand
people who
that,
are
but think about US healthcare is whatever politicians come up with. I mean, both sides. I want to say, kind of, it sucks. Okay, both sides, their ideas suck. Like it goes to two extremes. One is extreme fantasy. The other one is extreme fantasy.
Yeah, no, for sure, right? Like, what's frustrating is that it ultimately leads into obviously like big corporations lining their own pockets, right? And like the issue I have with that is that because healthcare isn't exactly affordable, or people get into trouble and then have to pay hospital bills that they can't afford, right? There's a lot of people that ultimately end up turning to shadier methods to earn money, right? And thankfully, I'm fortunate and blessed enough to not deal with, going into. I'm fortunate enough to not necessarily have to, starve on the streets and live in an impoverished neighborhood, or come from a background like that, but like there are a lot of issues in the US that ultimately have led to increased, crime rates. And obviously, like, because you know we have a culture of firearms, right, that has also become like a morally gray kind of thing, right? Because it's easy to get it if you haven't committed a crime before, right? But then there's also a lot of criminals who end up committing crimes with firearms. It turns out that 50 to 60% of them are pretty much just stolen, right? 20% of them are, like bought by someone else, or yeah, they're just found at like the scene of the crime and just taken, right? Like it's really weird to think about how firearms essentially, or they're purchased off like the black market. It's really interesting to see like where firearms are sourced from, when you like talk to criminals and the sort like that, right? Because America obviously, like, it doesn't. So there's a lot of like misconceptions that people have about purchasing firearms. There is a background check that you have to pass, right? And people will just say like, oh, it's not good enough. But like, what it goes through like an FBI database of whether or not you're a felon, are you a domestic abuser, are you a sexual offender, right? You give your social security number, right? Are you have you been admitted to a psychiatric hospital before uh, you know, under police order, or have you court ordered, like, were you court ordered before to were you ever detained for like some other reason, right? So like the background check obviously, like, it does have people go through, but
Yeah,
like,
okay. So my question would be like, how does gun fairs work? Like, I hear a lot about it, but I don't really know much
okay.
about it.
Yeah, so gun fairs, right? Like that's like a bit of the what's interesting is that like gun fairs, people have this like weird misconception that you could go in, take like $100, $200, and just buy whatever, right? Which in today's economy, that's not really easy. But like we could talk about that later.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, um, so to sell a firearm in the U.S., right, you need to be a federal firearm licensed dealer, right? Which you have to go through a bunch of paperwork and steps to essentially be able to collect those firearms and sell it to people, right?
Okay.
And some people do this for like a living. Some people do this for as like a side hustle. So like I've looked up some people, and like they have like their own offices where they actually give out firearms, and then there's people that just do it out of the garage. But the thing is that to legally sell a firearm, you have to have an FFL, right? And those FFL people, they have to ensure that you keep every document. You have to make sure that people fill out like a 4473, which is the form required to fill out by the ATF, right? Or not the ATF, by the civilian, right? It goes to the ATF. All that information gets sent to the ATF to make sure that you are legally able to purchase firearms. So at gun fairs, the only people that are allowed to create booths are people with those FFLs, right? Those licenses to sell firearms. So essentially, whenever you purchase a firearm from there, you have to, like, at every booth, people will be set up with the 4473 form, right? They'll literally slide it to you. They will, go through all the little, they'll go through every little detail necessary to um, complete the form. So they either call like an automated thing from the ATF, or they'll do it online, because I think the ATF also has something online as well. So like it's there are background checks done at gun fairs, and yeah, you can just walk out with a firearm, right? Like that is true, but you also have to pass a background check, right? And obviously, if you haven't committed a crime before, like you don't have anything to worry about, right? Or if you've never been convicted, there are plenty of people that commit crimes like piracy. But if you're not a felon, right, then it's not necessarily you know, you can still walk in and just walk out. But yeah, gun fairs are essentially just like events set up. They're like, think about like mini fairs or like conventions, I guess, except, you know, gun fairs are a lot more on the very small scuff convention spectrum, right? You have a venue, right? People go to it, and it's not super big, but it's sizable because America has a pretty decent gun culture in a lot of states. So yeah, I
And
don't know if my explanation was good, because I
yeah,
know I
so
kind of
it's how, but whatever I've seen tends to be you can walk in, buy a gun, and I'm like, is that how it works?
yeah, it's really not. There's a lot of fear mongering and a lot of misconception with how firearms are essentially sold, or how firearms are essentially, uh, you know, dealt with in the U.S. And like it is really it's really clear to see how some people, like, when you hear what they say, they ultimately end up you can sort of tell, you can generally tell that they've never tried to purchase a firearm before, right? Because so like at the federal level, right, you have to fill out the 4473, right? That is what happens in every single state. You have to pass the background check. That is the baseline, right? And obviously there's a few more factors that go into it on a federal level. Like you can't purchase a fully automatic weapon unless you go through like literally like a year's worth of paperwork, as well as also like if like a rifle can be, if like a budget rifle for like an AR-15 can be anywhere from like $800 to $1,000 USD, right? Like a fully automatic firearm will probably be upwards of $23,000, right? And I think that's on the cheaper end.
And
There's plenty of
I'm quite sure you can buy a car for that amount.
right. So like essentially the only people that are really into purchasing like the more extreme shit are people who are already collectors and have the money to actually, like, the actual fuck you money to back it up, right? um so like buying it as a normal consumer like you or me, or I guess like myself, really, because I don't know, like I have a salary job, like I make an okay amount of money for my age, but I'm also not making an exorbitant amount where I'm like, wow, I can just buy anything I want, right? So like it's really not the most accessible thing for me either, right? So yeah, like you can't buy a fully automatic firearm, right? Unless you are rich enough or filled out enough of the paperwork, and even then, there's only a handful of fully automatic firearms in the U.S., and that mostly has to do with firearms from before 1986, or things that were manufactured by an actual gunsmith or gun dealer that has the qualifications for that, right? Then you also end up going to the next level where it's just like, okay, if you're buying a rifle, is it a pistol, like a rifle, or a shotgun, or is it other, right? And then there's like a bunch of like little criteria that needs to be ticked off, right? If it's if you can shoulder it, it's a rifle, right? If it has but it has to have a 16-inch barrel. Any shorter, then you have to pay like a $200 tax stamp that takes a few months to come through. You can't get a suppressor unless you pay $200, and also with that tax stamp, that takes a while for the paperwork to go through, right? And if it's if you don't shoulder it, right, then it's a pistol, even though it's an AR-15. Like it's so, there's so many like tickers that need to be checked off, that and it's really annoying sometimes, especially when you get more into it, rather than just buying whatever's on like a gun store shelf, right? But like when you go further into it, rather than just being at the federal level, you end up having the state level, right? And there's obviously 50 states in the U.S., and every state has a different set of rules. And that is the reason why I think that it's so frustrating talking to people who are pretty anti-gun, because a lot of them don't really understand their own state laws, that they can't really fathom why, like, the whole prospect of gun control is such like a farce. California, for example, and New York City just had two really massive fucked up shootings,
Okay,
right?
so California, I'll get into that. California, there was one specific loophole that I found interesting.
No, okay.
Okay, so California, California, they're pro-gun till, they're anti-gun till one specific thing comes up: 3D printed guns.
Wait, repeat that?
Okay, so California, from my understanding, has the largest 3D printed gun industry out there.
Yeah.
So the California leadership, which is normally anti-gun, doesn't really seem that anti-gun when it comes to stopping 3D printed guns.
Well, so that's actually something that Biden kind of addressed recently. They're trying to pass legislation right now. I think they have passed legislation, and there's a lot of rule changes coming up. But they're changing the way that like quote unquote ghost guns, like that. I hate the terminology, right? But essentially, like what people would do is that to get around, sometimes dealing with like an FFL or purchasing firearms, they'll get a 80% lower. So it's essentially just a hunk of steel that's a lower receiver of an AR-15, but you also have to do all the drilling, the milling, and everything yourself, right? And to be perfectly frank, I don't really think the common criminal is smart enough to deal with that.
The thing about this is, I don't think it really concerns the common criminal.
Yeah, right. So like so like I think that's also the other thing too, right? Like it is a loophole to like 3D print your guns, right? But it's also really not as easy to 3D print guns as much as you think, right? Like you have to still purchase lower. You still have to, or even then, right? Like the thing is like homemade firearms has always been sort of an American kind of thing. People have been doing it in their backyard since forever, and there's plenty of people like the fact that I'm building an AR right now, right? Like that's kind of an interesting sort of prospect to it. People have been building guns everywhere, and I feel like 3D printing is just the next evolution in it, right? And even though 3D printing might be pretty big in like California, that doesn't also reflect like everyone, or I guess the common criminal. And if that is a loophole, right? I mean, fuck it, I'll take it. But it doesn't really feel like a loophole because people have been building their own firearms since forever, or I guess forever in America's time. So like I feel as if like being able to create your own firearms, being able to customize it and build it in your own garage has never been something that has infringed on the inherent like concept of gun culture in America. It shouldn't necessarily break laws, but I guess it does. But even then, most people are probably not going to have the know-how to 3D print most firearms, and most people are probably not going to have the know-how how to put 3D printed firearms together. But like at the end of the day, California is also just like a massive shithole where its laws are pretty much layered in such a way where it's impossible to navigate the legislation that has pretty much been addressed, and it's man, that is a state that I have a lot of comments about.
My biggest complaint, even though I haven't been there, is the real estate price. But
oh yeah, no, definitely, right? Like real estate price and whatever. Like people always talk about how great living in California is because you get a lot of money from your jobs,
okay, who those people are? They ain't common folk.
Yeah, right. Because like at the end of the day, the problem with California and income is that the cost of living is so high that it just balances out, right? I would rather have like an 80K paying job with an income tax of maybe like 10% instead of living in California and getting 100K or 120K and having an income tax of like 40%, right? So I mean, I don't know the actual mathematical breakdown of that right now because I can't do math in my head. But like it is sort of like interesting to think about. But like states across the US have different sort of requirements for owning firearms, right? Because like if you go to Oklahoma, right, things are about as unregulated as can be. You don't need a permit for carrying. You don't need a permit for carrying concealed or open. People sometimes just open carry like ARs, which is okay. That's crazy. A lot of their laws are pretty lax. Texas, for example, deregulated suppressors, so you don't have to go through the whole act of getting like a $200 tax stamp. But like if you go into like New York, like if you buy a rifle, it has to have an internal magazine. Like you can't detach it, and if it is detachable, it can't be more than 10 bullets. Or I guess it's like any I guess any rifle can't have more than 10 bullets. It can't have a barrel shroud, so no flash suppressor or muzzle brake or compensator. It has to be. It can't be 16 inches. It has to be 20 inches for it to be okay in New York. You can't have like a regular pistol grip. So like I guess the best way to put it is what's
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. The one that rests on your shoulder.
Yeah. The shoulder?
Yeah, it's I think I don't know what you call it. It's kind of curved and just goes on back to your shoulder. Something similar to what a shotgun has.
Yeah, kind of. I guess that would be the best way to describe it, right? So like a lot of ARs that are built in New York are really like weirdly designed in such a way where it has to comply with New York laws and it just looks really neutered. But like that also isn't as bad as like California law, right? With an AR, you have to essentially pop the pins, detach the lower receiver and the upper receiver if you want to remove the magazine, which is just like, oh, what the fuck, kind of situation. But people do that, so it's kind of weird. And then if you go to Illinois, which is the state with Chicago, right? You have to get a firearm owner identity card, or a FOID for short, if you just want to legally purchase a firearm, right? In Massachusetts and Maryland, it's actually the same thing as well. You have to have a permit just to.
I'm aware about Massachusetts and Maryland. I have a couple of friends there. Yeah. My first question is, can you buy a gun? And they're like, no, too much work.
Yeah. It is a lot of work, right? And that's essentially what a lot of the legislation comes down to. It's either too much work that it scares people off, or it's too expensive and it scares people off. I think like when I lived in New York and I wanted to even think like handle a handgun in New York, right? You have to get a pistol permit, which is you have to essentially fill out this lengthy application process with multiple references. Okay, that's pretty doable. I have a lot of friends that trust me. I'm a good person, right? I think. It's subjective. You have to, hand that in. The application fee is exorbitantly expensive, and it depends on like which county you go to, because it can be anywhere from $80 to $300. You have to get interviewed by a judge, right? And you can't say self-defense, right? If you say self-defense, they deny your application. And I've talked with enough people from New York to have their applications denied because they put down self-defense. And then you go on to a point where the judge looks at you, and then they give you the approval, and then you wait 6 months, right? And then your permit eventually is available. Or it depends, right? It can be anywhere from 3 months to like 8 months. I've seen people wait like a solid year for a permit, right? Okay, so now you have the permit in hand. You go to a gun store, you purchase a handgun, and there's still restrictions on how like handguns are handled. You can't have a magazine more than 15. You can't have certain like accessories and so on and so forth. And like it's a smorgasbord of whatever, of legislation, paperwork, time, money that goes into it that is just like a headache. And meanwhile, the state that I lived in before I moved to where I am now, and the state that I live in now, it's just sort of, you can walk in, you can purchase a firearm, fill out the background check. In my state and the previous state the previous state I was in, there was a separate background check that went through that state's police department. And this state's a lot more lax, so you just fill out the 4473. So like it's just like really weird to talk about gun control and like laws in general, because there's so many states that are just like, it's like a cascading not a cascading effect. It's like a maze, really. And every state just has a different maze that you have to sort of tunnel through.
And that sounds like alcohol laws over here.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So and there's a state over here where drinking is illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in my state, age of drinking is 21. Let's say I drive a couple of 100 kilometers down south. There's we call it a union territory. It's similar to what Puerto Rico is for you guys. It's directly controlled by the central government. There, the legal age of drinking is 18. Hell, there's a state where the legal drinking age is close to 30.
That's kind of funny. And I can imagine that's like a fucking headache to think about, especially if you travel a lot in between states, right?
Think about it over here as we do. Like, drinking over here is, if it's illegal, you ain't gonna find a bar.
Yeah, right. But that probably doesn't stop people from like breaking the law and drinking at home, probably, right? If they get their hands on alcohol.
Yeah, thing is, like, let's take my state back in the day. I think it was the 80s. We had prohibition. Every bad idea the Americans had, we beat you to it.
Oh yeah, prohibition.
Yeah, it didn't work out.
That's actually a really funny aspect of American gun history with prohibition. Prohibition is kind of one of the key factors why I fucking hate gun control, because it's essentially a problem that the U.S. created for themselves, and that grew into something else. But I can talk about that later.
I'd say prohibition is more with the current. It has more in common with the current war against drugs than gun control.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it has something, but like the thing is that there's a lot of like, I mean, obviously causation doesn't equal correlation, but like you could sort of see that there were effects that essentially led to the like why crime rate increased or why it was easier for crime rates to increase, right? Because when you make something that is sought after by essentially most people illegal, they're probably still going to try and see it, right? So essentially, we had a lot of speakeasies and a lot of, you ended up having, which are like these underground bars where people would essentially, congregate to drink. And like a lot of cops would either break, there'd be like hard ass cops that would break them up, or there'd be a lot of cops that just be like, yeah, whatever, right? But like you've heard of Al Capone, right?
Yeah.
Famous like Chicago gangster.
The guy with syphilis.
Yeah, who died, who got arrested not because of gangster acts, but because of
tax evasion. Tax evasion.
Yeah, it's a very funny story, right? But like the thing is that this was around the era where the civilian market was introduced to a fully automatic firearm called the Thompson or the Tommy gun, right? This was the M1927 iteration, or I guess, and essentially this submachine was created for the very tail end of World War I for American troops to use. But World War I ended, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, and the firearm got shelved. But, the patent was still there. It was a revolutionary firearm for the time, or not revolutionary, but it was considered to be very state of the art. And so they were like, okay, I guess we can just sell it to the civilians because, right to bear arms and everything. And the thing is that as that happened, it would have been around $200 in 1920.
Okay.
Let me get a $200 for
adjusted for inflation or the price back then.
Yeah. So.
Was it adjusted for inflation? Was it the standard price back then? Because if you adjusted for inflation, it'll be much more than 200.
Yeah, no, definitely, right? It would have been worth about $2,875 today, right? Which is still arguably very cheap for a fully automatic firearm because, other stuff. But like, it is really interesting because Prohibition created a lot of gang culture, where people would be, smuggling alcohol from one place to another, and that was an incredibly profitable business. And because people were willingly giving money to, the criminals, they had essentially the easiest time getting their hands on what would be considered extremely expensive commodities back in the day, ranging anywhere from vehicles to firearms, right? And so as a result, the Thompson was now an incredibly easily accessible firearm for a lot of gangsters, and it became a very big firearm within the gangster community. It's the reason why Tommy guns are really commonly seen in like noir films, because that was essentially like what they used, or as like, and it had like other names too, like the Chicago typewriter, right? Like because it had like a certain chattering to it. And like that's like, kind of cool thinking about it. But as a result, like we ended up getting the NFA, or the National Firearms Act of 1934, right? And the 1934 NFA was the thing that put into place a lot of the tickers necessary to sort of legislate and break down what firearms are. So if you wanted a firearm now, you had to pay an additional $200 tax stamp, right? That never adjusted for inflation, so now it's just been a flat 200 across the years, right? Um, but like there's that. You can't buy a suppressor, tax stamp, right? Anything under 16 inches, tax stamp, right? If it's like there's a lot of like things. If it's a sawn off like shotgun, tax stamp, right? I think the only thing that really was like not super obnoxious was like handguns, really. But like even then, the NFA is just like this really stupid piece of legislation that was born because of an issue that the U.S. government sort of created, right? Because I feel as if prohibition never really happened, yeah, sure, it would have been accessible, but it wouldn't have been a situation where people would have been able to get them really easily. But the thing is that since gangsters were still making an insane amount of money, an insane amount of bank, the Gun Control Act went through, or the NFA went through, right? It was passed in the US. Now people have to pay tax stamps. You end up having a situation where gangsters are still able to afford it, because why not? Because they're essentially the ones still making the most amount of money. Okay. So that did nothing, right? And you fast forward 60 years later, Ronald Reagan's era, right? And we had the war on drugs, and then you see the late 80s and the early 90s having a massive uptick in crime and gang-related activity because people are smuggling cocaine, marijuana, right? What is it? Heroin, so on.
Primarily cocaine and marijuana.
Yeah, primarily cocaine and marijuana, right? And a lot of that has to do with like the CIA trying to fund themselves.
Yeah, the Iran-Contra affair, that was primarily cocaine.
Yeah. But like at the end of the day, right, like creating these sort of situations where a lot of these things are illegal and difficult to, difficult to get, you end up creating a market for it, right? You've created a power vacuum where people are trying to consolidate that power into selling it, and they've essentially been able to, they essentially can monopolize on it, right? I mean, maybe not monopolize, there's obviously different gangs out there, right? But they can essentially get a metric ton of money and afford a lot of the hardware that is associated with a lot of these gang shootings. And then, in 1994, during the Clinton administration, we had the assault weapons ban, right? And this essentially banned the importation of a ton of firearms, which makes me really upset because there's a lot of really cool Cold War firearms out there that I desperately want.
Okay, Noona, word of advice, the AK series isn't as great as they claim it to be, okay?
Sorry, what?
Russian stuff ain't as good as they claim it is. Just a word of advice.
I mean, yeah, that's debatable, right? The AKM is still probably, in my opinion, the greatest like firearm ever created, right? It's not my personal favorite, but I definitely, if I was ever in an apocalypse, I would trust it over like an AR, right?
I would say the exact opposite, but we all have our tastes.
Yeah, no, I get that. But like the assault weapons ban essentially banned importation of all sorts of Cold War firearms, ranging from like Russia, but also like you have the Daewoo K2 from South Korea. Right? And there were a few more imports with like modifications for the American market at the time, but they're still pretty rare, right? You ended up getting what is it? The Belgium FNC that was banned. I'm pretty sure.
I don't know. Isn't that used by special forces?
Yes.
Doesn't the U.S. Army Special Forces use that?
No. I think I'm pretty sure the Belgium Army just used. No, that was pretty like. I'm pretty sure that's the standard infantry rifle in Belgium, because like they transitioned over from the FNFAL to the FNFNC, right? Because they needed a firearm that fired a 5.56 cartridge instead of a 7.62 one, right? But the Swedish army did take that and modified it to the AK-5, right? Which is so the Swedish, I think special forces use the AK-5. Yeah. So there's a lot of like legal rights that have sort of been like, oh, well, we'll take this and we'll produce it in our own country and make it into whatever, right? But there were a lot of firearms that essentially, there are a lot of firearms over the course of like that were essentially like removed from American markets at that point, right? Like any German firearm was essentially taken off the table back in '94. right? And it was really funny because lo and behold, it turns out that they didn't have an impact on crime at all. Um, so
Yeah, thing how I put it. Most crime ain't gonna be committed by imported stuff unless it's unless it's Mexico. That's a different story
yeah,
on its own.
yeah, unless it's Mexico, right? So I guess it's just sort of like you see a lot of like uptick in crime, and a lot of it sometimes has to do with the way that American legislation works, right? If guns ever get banned in America, first off, I'd be really sad. That'd be one less reason to live. But two, but two, like you essentially create another vacuum,
No,
right? And
I
only
seriously doubt that
people.
they'll ban guns in the States.
Nah, probably. I mean, probably not. But it is going to be like super neutered. I give it like 20 years before everyone's firing. Owning like California style, California legal like firearms. So I don't know, man.
The thing is, California legal comes in two things. One is you buy it off the store, the other thing is you print it yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I guess that's the reason why like the government is super up. So like the first like 3D printed firearms really became a thing back in like 2018, right? Or at least the most like commonly associated ones, easy to access ones, really came about in like 2018, and there was a massive uproar with like media outlets and so on and so forth about how like you can't you shouldn't share this information or this information is banned, but like it's also like code, right? It's just code for your 3D printed stuff, right? And like not everyone has a 3D printer, or the accessibility of 3D printers is pretty difficult to get. So it's like kind of questionable, right? As to why people like feared it so much.
No, I'd
I
say
don't
the
know.
thing about 3D printed guns is it might be fine in the States, but let's say over here, like access to a 3D printer is pretty easy.
But Koki, let me ask you this: how easy is it to get ammo?
Depends if you know about. Depends on who you know.
Right. And most normal people probably don't know that. And
Yeah.
obviously this is just
Nah,
us like
yeah.
but like
The issue
go ahead.
isn't with normal people. The issue is with
Criminals.
well, not exactly that. They have their own supply chains.
Hmm.
It's about organized crime.
Yeah. Wait,
The-
doesn't that technically fall under the umbrella of criminal?
yes and no. No, that's it's called politician over here.
Oh, that's fair, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, I get that, right? Because I mean, there's plenty. Like, if you look at like Japan and like the yakuza and how organized crime is essentially
Okay,
like,
okay. The Japanese yakuza, you can't call them organized crime. That's an insult
yeah,
to organized crime.
okay,
Think about the yakuzas. They're pretty effective against Japanese people, but they're not effective against people from outside.
yeah,
Let's say hypothetically, a Russian bratva, that's a Russian a mafia unit, decides to move into Japan, just hypothetically.
hmm
The Japanese yakuzas are screwed.
yeah,
Or the Chinese triads decide to move into Japan.
yeah,
The only reason the Japanese yakuzas exist is any external crime family moving into Japan would be tough due to the Japanese government.
yeah, pretty much, right? So I know organized crime is like sort of the biggest like issue when it comes to that kind of stuff, which is all the more reason why I think like, and I get why like that sort of information is like feared in places outside of the US, right? So yeah, but I guess like I have a very American centric point of view, if you couldn't tell. um so it is hard to sort of detach myself
Yeah, and
from
see, thing is, like, despite what comes in the news, I'd say States is relatively one of the most peaceful places in the planet right now.
Yeah, yeah, right. A lot of people. It's funny that like people continually say that America is one of the most like dangerous countries to live, right? And I'm just sitting here like,
But please do visit my country.
yeah, right. Like, how sheltered of a human being are you, right? Like, do you live in like the inner city streets? Like, do you live in Detroit? Do you live in Chicago? Do you live in Baltimore? My God, my yeah. That's I don't know. That's also like one of the things that I there's a lot of people out there that like live in cities, and it's my sister is vehemently very anti-gun, right? And like I've brought up how like I didn't like Trump's policies on like bump stocks and stuff like that, right? And it was really like funny and annoying to think about things because like she was just like, "Why do you have an issue with that?" Right? Like, do you know that like guns are really dangerous, this and that? And I'm like, like calm down, right? Like you don't want to have a conversation with me, you just want to like yell at me, right? But like this is also coming from the same woman who was mugged like 2 or 3 times in the city that she lived in by guys with guns. And I'm just like, yeah, obviously that can be traumatizing, but she has like every self-defense weapon under the sun except the gun. And I'm like, why don't you move,
Nah,
please?
okay, in this case, I'd say the answer isn't more guns. I'd say the answer is.
I think my sister's just stupid.
Nah, I'd say the answer is not her buying a gun. I'd say the answer is more or less economic policies of said state or city.
Yeah, pretty much, right? I mean, that's every city in general, right? I think I mentioned this before, but like cities just have massive socioeconomic problems that ultimately lead
Yeah.
to a lot of.
And because people who mug, they ain't doing it for the fun of it.
They're doing it for
To
money,
feed their
right?
families.
Pretty much, right? But
Or feed themselves.
Yeah, feed themselves, right? But I also doubt that like getting $28. I don't even carry cash with me anymore. No, I carry like $5 on me, right? Actually, no. Let me check my wallet. I carry $18 with me, right? I doubt that like someone is going to be able to feed themselves for long with like $18 with how expensive like restaurant prices are nowadays. Even like fast food, like I guess fast food you can deal with that, but like I don't know, man.
No, see, no, it's more like they'll move on to the next person they can mug.
Yeah.
And see, back when the pandemic hit its peak, I knew a priest, okay, a Catholic priest, a really nice guy in the community where he lived in, really respected, arrested stealing cycles.
Wait, sorry, repeat that.
He was arrested by the local police department for trying to steal a local kid's cycle, so he can sell it off and, I don't know, get some food, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people.
So when you're desperate, you don't think about okay, how many people I should mug to get some food.
Yeah, pretty much. No, that's valid, right? So there's a lot of people out there that are like just trying to make it, and it frustrates me that I mean I think we mentioned this at the beginning of the stream, but there's a lot of purple poetry between trying to virtue signal and people saying a lot of purple poetry about being, good human beings, but at the end of the day, they really don't care. I mean, California, I think back in like 2019, before like the pandemic hit and everything, like I think within that year, homelessness increased by like 40%, which was insane to think about.
That's Cali for you.
Yeah, right. That is California for you, but it's supposed to be like but it is supposed to be this place that is an economic like powerhouse where you can get a job and make it in the US and stuff like that. And there's a lot of people out there that I've talked to where it's just like if you can make it in Cali, you can make it anywhere. And I'm just sitting here like, yeah.
No, they actually have a point. If you can make it in Cali, you can make it anywhere because Cali's so tough to get a job.
Yeah, no, for sure, right? But it's also one of those things that like I just it sucks that like rent and taxes are so fucking high in that state that it has caused homelessness to be as bad as it is, right? And nowadays, and like in those states, right, in the cities, it's mostly just a lot of people who it's a lot of heroin and a lot of junkies and homeless people and gangs shooting each other. I mean, I also did mention this, right? Like,
wasn't the gang problem much more worse in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, but that doesn't change the fact that like
gangs still exist.
Yeah, it still exists, and it also is getting worse, right? Like, one of the big things that comes to mind is the recently Sacramento, California had a shooting, right? It was a lot of gang violence, right? 6 people were dead, fully automatic firearms were involved. And the reason, and I think, and it had to do, I don't remember which, like, ethnicity, which nationality they were, but, like, it was just a gang shooting, right?
Okay, so and California, which gangs are the Jamaican, like, the Caribbean gangs, the Mexicans, Colombians, Cubans?
I think it was like a European gang. Pretty sure.
Mostly Eastern Europe.
Yeah, Eastern Europe. So I don't know. It's just like really funky. And then after that, like New York City just recently had a pretty big shooting. In Brooklyn. It was actually pretty insane. Like a really close friend of mine actually went to Brooklyn, and then the next day the shooting happened, and I'm just like, holy fuck. I'm so glad that you weren't there. Yeah, it's a funky situation, but like I remember we were talking, we were talking. I looked further into the story, and it turns out that the guy was just like this crazy 62-year-old dude who's very like black nationalist, and he had a YouTube channel and a lot of social media where he just talked about hating like white people, hating
Okay,
a lot of like,
so
politicians in
it's
New York.
okay. It's like the extreme. Okay, I'd say history is repeating itself
Yeah, pretty much, right?
because this reminds me of the. I won't say the whole movement, more of the extreme end of the Black Power movement.
Yeah, yeah, right. It is the. I mean, it's just like any mentality, any ideology taken to its extreme level, right? And like it's like the Black Panthers, I guess, but mentally insane and not actually that iconic. But yeah, it's crazy how he pretty much just went in with. It's pretty crazy that he went in, created like his homemade smoke bombs, popped them in a car, and then just started shooting people. Right? He surprisingly didn't kill anyone, which is just how do you manage to fuck
That's
that
called
up?
incompetence, but yeah.
Yeah, and then how do you?
That's why I don't consider Japanese yakuza an actual organized crime
Yeah,
because apparently there was a quote unquote gang war of how many? Let me just check. Yakuza civil war. There was a Yakuza civil, the Yamachi war as they called it.
hmm,
Okay, how many were 220 gun battles and only 36 people were killed.
hmm.
220, 36.
That is, yeah. You know what they say? American gangs do it better.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'm quite sure
Right,
American gangs don't fall for hi, I'm an American arms dealer ads on Craigslist or anything of that sort.
yeah, yeah.
Because
So
the war ended with one gang's leadership, one Yakuza's leadership being arrested by the FBI because they fell for FBI honeypot
yeah,
and flew all the way to Hawaii to buy guns from the FBI.
That's amazing. I don't know. It is really funny thinking about how there's like an internet culture associated with calling people out for being what is it? Feds or glowies. Right? People will be like, "You're glowing pretty hard." And then they'd come over and be like, "Oh yeah, you sound like a federal agent, Mr. Man. Can you you know, not?" or yeah, I don't know, man. It's just like it's funny having that culture of internet culture of like calling out federal agents now, but like yeah, it is crazy thinking about how like shootings can still happen in some of the most restrictive places in the US, and that is somehow uh that still is like a call for politicians to want to create more gun control. And I'm just like, what more can you do? You can't get a firearm in New York City unless you're a federal, like unless you're a cop or like a law enforcement officer or really 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 rich, right? You can't like it's frustrating, right?
Um,
Because for me, I'm just like, man, I want fully automatic hardware so I can have fun and shoot in like a range. No, but yeah, I don't know.
no, I'd say the entire thing about US gun policy would be, maybe it's not the okay. See, sure, stopping firearms could theoretically speaking reduce the violence,
Yeah,
but maybe just maybe they could focus more on, let's say, welfare programs.
yeah,
Yeah, I know. Like, I know someone's gonna call me a commie in the on the comment section for this. But
that's whatever,
so the
right?
thing is, but like, and no, I'm not saying to eat the rich because I think eat the rich is pretty dumb. That
No,
policy
that's
won't work.
exactly
That won't work. All they gotta do is slightly increase, restructure government spending, and it should be handled well enough.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like it's I mean it's a consolidation of so okay, so the thing about like gun control is that it becomes more and more accessible to the common person, right? Even people who are poor, right? Because there's so many loopholes, there's so many more like hurdles to overcome when it comes to purchasing that kind of stuff, right? And America is really weird because we are an obsessive like welfare state, right? Like I think 40 to 60% of our US spending is actually focused on welfare programs.
And I'd say it's not. And like my take would be they ain't doing a good job at that.
It really isn't. And Which is, I mean, it's actually kind of funny thinking about that, right? Because I think like back in 2020, we had during the election, we had Andrew Yang, right? And he had like he was just like, all right, let's just eliminate like welfare programs and at least try our hand at like universal basic income instead, right? And that clearly didn't work out for him. But I
To
mean,
be see, I don't want to sound like that person, but Yang never had a chance.
he did it.
No, for one simple thing.
He's not white. No, God.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Right. No, I mean, what is it? There's that one joke that I heard recently. It's like American imperialism is 100% justified because we had a black president once, and I'm like,
Okay. So think about Obama being black. I find weird is he's half white. His mom's white. So
yeah.
the thing about American race classification that I find weird is so unless you're pure white, you're not white.
Yeah. Well, see, the funny part is that like, so Andrew Yang is, he's Chinese American, right?
Isn't he?
But, like,
Isn't he Taiwanese American? Okay, we're on YouTube. It's fine. They're not gonna take us out.
I mean, it's probably either one. He's probably Taiwanese American, right? But like the reason why I think Andrew Yang was really respectable was because he actually did try his best at creating dialogues with everyone.
Yeah, but the other side.
Right? But on the other end of the spectrum now, talking with people is great, but being a politician is shitty, right? There's a lot of other like puppet masters going on at once, and that it's going to make me sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I mean, America is sort of not really as democratic as people think it is, right? I mean,
No, not to be honest, I don't think any country is as democratic as it claims to be.
Right. Like that's pretty. I think that's pretty obvious, right? But like Biden in no chance and should have had no chance in hell being like the Democratic nominee during 2020, but somehow he was. Right, in the same vein that Kamala Harris shouldn't ever have been the fucking vice president. Oh, that's the train. Sorry, I looked.
Okay, it's fine. I said things. I even hear trains from my end. Like, is it from my end?
But yeah,
the thing about Harris as VP is, I know. See, I can say this. I'm brown. Okay, I can say this. How I put, like her take on drugs. I find that extremely hypocritical.
Isn't she extremely hypocritical?
No, didn't she put men and women behind bars for drugs? Well, now she's like, drugs are cool, kids.
Yes.
I'm like,
she was incredibly criticized for her prosecution, right? And this is what is it? Tulsi Gabbard is another like Democratic politician I really like because a lot of her policies embody like classical liberalism rather than like the current liberalism that we have now. Right. And so like on stage during the primary, she straight up just comes up to Kamala Harris and just goes like, hey, you say as if you're fighting for the people, but you're also the same person who like continually persecutes and puts people behind bars like without remorse. Like, what are you doing? And like you are not fit to be like the president or like even vice president because like you are not a fan of the people. You do not offer anything in the name of the people.
And
right?
I would have respected her if she just said one thing. No shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, obviously, right? I don't know. Kamala Harris is just like
she's a politician.
Yeah.
And the thing about Kamala Harris, the weird thing about her is people in my state, in my country, love her.
Yeah, I mean,
because her mother's from my state.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm like she's the thing. One thing about Indians is anyone with like let's say 0.1% of Indian DNA, like that's one of our people. Like no, it doesn't work that way.
It really doesn't. But like, it is sort of interesting thinking about how much people are okay with their own like ethnicity or nationality being represented. It's an interesting thought. Right. I think Kamala Harris is sort of unique because I don't know, like I guess that's like the internet in general. There's always going to be someone that supports the most like ridiculous of ideas, right? Some people really love Kamala Harris not because of what she's done, but because she's the first woman to be vice president. Which I mean, yeah, that is an accomplishment, but also like I really wish it wasn't Kamala Harris. Please, it should have been Tulsi Gabbard.
See, I would have been fine with what's her name again? The economist.
Who?
What's the name again? The one that Trump calls Pocahontas.
AOC?
Not AOC,
Alexandra
not AOC. This one's white. This one's like as white as you can get.
Let me look this up. Oh, Elizabeth Warren.
Nah, I'm even fine with her.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of people also have like issues with Elizabeth Warren, that she's a very standard politician, right? But she definitely would have been a step up over.
Nah, see. She's a standard politician, but you know what you're getting yourself into with her.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Like Kamala Harris is very much so like I have a lot of influence behind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the thing is, the worst that Warren's done is she claimed to be Native American.
Yeah. I think that's also, man, it's interesting thinking about like woke culture and thinking about how labels have essentially become super important in the US. And I mean, like, obviously, there's a lot of people that are really very, identity is very important to them, right? But like, I have never been associated with my identity. I have always been a Korean male. I have always been an American, right? I've always, I've never really thought about it. I've always been 5'6". So like people kind of, I guess like nowadays, people are really obsessive with trying to make a name for themselves with whatever sort of, ethnicity or blood that they have. I think it was really funny reading some art like headlines back in 2020 or 2019 leading up to the election where it's like, oh, like Kamala Harris is the first Indian president, and then after that, like a few months later, it's Kamala Harris is the first black president. And I'm like, wait, I mean, so she's both, right? But like,
yeah, technically she is. I agree with that, but my thing is, just because she's Indian, don't give her a pass.
Yeah, right. That's always been my stance on it, right? Politicians shouldn't ever get like a pass on. Politicians shouldn't ever get a pass on like things just because they're a certain ethnicity. It's always about merit, right? It's whether. That's just. It's the reason why like affirmative action was something that was such a controversial issue for a lot of individuals or people, right?
Another issue, maybe this, and I'm not sure about how popular it is in the States, but it's like every problem was done by the white man. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. All our ancestors were assholes.
Yeah.
Like the entire movement about if there were no white people, the world would be a peaceful place. I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
That's not how it works.
I'm like, humans as a species, we exploit others.
Yeah, right. And obviously, it's the result of shitty people coming into power, right?
Noona, think about that. Shitty people always come to power.
Yeah, right. Because they're the ones that are always willing to exploit others to get to that power. Right?
And they're the ones that are willing to push boundaries.
Yeah, pretty much, right? So, I think like the reason why it's like weird to me because the safety of that's not on. Sorry about that. Anyway, but the reason why like it's the famous case about like, oh, if white people were all gone, there everything would be solved, right? Like Zimbabwe and Mugabe. My God, that is
okay. So you don't need to go with that reason. Like, okay, there was one article I've told the story before on stream a year ago. There was this one article I read about. You heard the concept of Chai boys?
The which boys?
Chai boys. It's a pretty disturbing thing that's practiced in certain parts of Central Asia and the Middle East.
I do not know what this is.
Okay, so what they do is they have underage boys that they use to relieve stress.
Oh, I might have heard of that.
Yeah, it's pretty popular in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And it has its roots in the Middle East. Okay, back in the day. No, I don't think they do it anymore. Hopefully they don't. It's not publicly done.
Right.
And even back then and now, it's discouraged. It's horrible. It's considered a sin in Islam, but they still do it because what God does not see. It's perfectly cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so the entire thing about Chai boys, so what it is, they brought up homophobia being a Western Judeo-Christian thing because apparently some Muslim caliph back in the day had a Chai boy. So he's progressive. I'm like, no, that's worse than being a homophobe. I'm like, what do you mean that's progressive? So I don't know if this is like, just villainize the West or people talking about stuff they don't understand.
No, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's not necessarily. It might just because you're talking about something that like people might not understand doesn't necessarily mean it's inaccessible, right? I mean, I feel like people know about these countries. Obviously, like you and I are from very different places in the world, like
Yeah.
very obviously, right? But like it is also something that is with like on a surface level is within the collective consciousness of like people.
Yeah, see, the thing is, chai boys, no, yeah, understandable. Like, but thing about, let's say, anything taken from a historic context is, people want to work for, like, let's say I call up a guy from Baghdad whose ancestor had chai boys. He's not gonna be like, yeah, my great granddad had chai boys.
Yeah,
You get what I
I
mean,
mean,
right?
but then, like, yeah, but like give or take, right? Like what my ancestors did has no bearing on me,
Yeah,
right?
see, that's the thing. People don't see things that way.
Yeah,
Like, see, I admit my ancestors were assholes. Okay,
yeah,
like us, you, okay, so my ancestor, yeah, I'm quite sure some of my ancestors were involved in cultural genocide.
yeah. I mean, like, I guess the thing nowadays is with certain people is that like a lot of there have been black people that really enjoy talking about how or not enjoy, but like they a lot of them like to bring up about how they were enslaved, right? And yes,
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's a tragedy. What happened to them?
it is obviously it's a tragedy, right? Like I would never support slavery unless of course I'm profiting off of it. But I mean that's besides the point. The thing is that like slavery is something that was abolished back in the 1800s, mid 1800s, because of the Civil War, and obviously black people didn't really get the most fair treatment after that too. They might have been emancipated, but they weren't given the same civil rights
Yep.
as normal white people. Not normal white people. Fuck, no, as normal people, right? As right, and then eventually, as the 50s, where Martin Luther King, Mr. King, became like a big deal, right? And he ended up becoming a situation where, a lot of shift in mentality, segregation was essentially like removed. But like the thing is that it's been almost a full to 2 generations of people since then, right? Because you had a lot of people who might have grown up during the civil rights movement. They became they followed a lot of what Martin Luther King said. They had children, right? That's the 70s and 80s, right? That's essentially like the children of people who came from Martin Luther King's era. Then you had like the 90s and the 2000s, and now we have this sort of weird amalgamation of people's thoughts and consciousness going back to sort of
Okay, Noona, sorry to interrupt you. There's a person called Zar Wolf that says hi to you.
That's oh wait what?
Check the check
Oh,
chat.
hi Sar, how you doing? He's a regular in my chat. He's a cool guy, all right. But yeah, I think okay. So like, it's weird talking about race in general, mostly because of the fact that like there have been I've been called a racist before, obviously, because who hasn't in America?
Okay, that's
like,
surprising. Do they call Asians racist? No, don't we get the racist pass?
So okay, it's actually kind of funny. So the thing is that obviously I'm a minority, right?
Yeah.
Like East Asians make up like what 6% of America? No, Asians in general make up about 6% of the American population. I don't know if that's still true, but like
I think it's more than that, but go on.
yeah, it's probably more than that. But like I, as a Korean American, am in this weird sort of place because to white people, we're closer to black people, and to black people, we're closer to white people.
Yeah,
And
that I've heard.
society as a whole, right, for East Asians in general, we're sort of treated like white people. I have been called privileged because I was born Korean American, instead of, say, black, right? And it's sort of like a weird sort of touchy subject, weird sort of situation for people because like it's uncomfortable to talk about because like as a Korean American, like what side do I take, right? And like obviously like the best answer is none of them, right?
Nah, so the thing is, I'd say Americans are really obsessed about race.
They really are, right? And it's weird because like growing up, like growing up as a kid, right? Like you don't really think about this. You don't really think about it, and then like people start telling you, and then you start noticing it, and then it just becomes like a full. And like with how obsessive people are about it, it feels as if there's someone always chomping at the bit, trying to like cause more problems than need to be, right? So like nowadays, it's weird because I like to think that Koreans are just or like Asian Americans are typically like the loneliest Americans, right? Because nobody roots for them, right? In certain school districts, we're counted as white people now. Like East Asians are actually counted as white people. Yeah, so there's a place in I think it was Arizona, and there was also a place in Maryland, and those are like the two real life examples that I know of, and I'm pretty sure there's more. But like they did a demographic breakdown of grades in their school, right? And then they did, you know, whites and East Asians grouped together, and then they did people of color, so the rest of the riffraff, right? And I'm like, huh.
So thing is, how I put this, I'd say it's unfair for the white people as well.
Yeah, right. So
don't Asians usually get good grades? Or is that just?
Well, right. So that's the stereotype because, like, so back in like, with back in the '80s, right? There was like a massive explosion of like Asian Americans coming to the U.S.
Immigration,
right?
yeah.
Immigration, right? And like Asian American as a term already is like kind of mixed up because
See, if I was based out of the States, I'll be clubbed in with you as Asian American.
Right. So like it's really fucking weird because also like Asian American in general also refers to like immigrants before the internment camps of World War II, and then Asian American actually refers to the children born in those internment camps, and then immigrants came over, and then they're born in the U.S. Are they still Asian American? Anyway, so like it's like a really weird terminology.
Yeah, I'd say the entire thing about race is just. I'm not saying I'm not saying having demographics about race is a bad thing. I'm just like clubbing everyone as Asian American, or white, or black. Just oversimplifies a complex issue.
Yes. So like, and it also is like annoying because the way that it is broken down ultimately leads to people seeing that division and sort of line between people as well, right? And it turns into a situation where like people are very obsessive with seeing those lines, right? I have unironically been befriended by people because I'm a minority. And that's like a really weird experience.
That sounds like something an Indian would do.
Yeah, right. So like at the end of the day, talking about it in general, like East Asians don't really have a place. They don't fit, right? And like obviously there's plenty of people that are very progressive and they're like, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter, all this stuff. But like generally speaking, a lot of the people that I've seen, like it's not as if these interest groups have your best interests at heart, right?
I don't think about modern society that I find an issue. Okay, the idea behind Black Lives Matter, I'd say it's a noble cause. However, the thing is, the moment you turn it into an organized movement, it's going to end up as someone's agenda.
Yeah.
And it's not, right. and that agenda ain't, making sure black people don't get shot in the streets. It's going to turn into something else.
Yeah, right. And I feel as if, like, doing the whole, obviously, like, I get where people come from when it comes to a lot of, like, progressive ideology, progressive things in general, because a lot of it is born from human empathy, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that I want people to understand. Like, I get being like empathetic towards other people. I am just as much of a human being as you, or maybe not, I don't know, because I'm apathetic to other things. But like a lot of people care about other individuals, and that's the reason why certain social causes exist, right? If you had if you were best friends with a black person and that black person was actively bullied or oppressed, you probably wouldn't stand for it.
Yeah.
Right. And so like it really is born from empathy, but the problem is that that empathy can be warped and manipulated into someone else's agenda, and it's insanely easy to manipulate people.
And that's one thing another shirt says, like, now everything's straight into an us versus them thing.
Yeah, it's very us versus them.
Yeah, see, from a social perspective, I'd say I kind of side more with the liberal side. What the Americans call left, but isn't exactly left.
Yeah.
Because right. You guys haven't seen Left. Left is terrible.
Yeah. Right, and like.
And but from an economic perspective, I side more with American right.
Yeah. No, that's totally.
I would,
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like politically speaking, right? It's not just a left or right. It's
yeah,
not a line.
yeah, it's
Even
not
then, it's
like,
not even the political. It's not even the political compass either,
yeah,
right? Like,
I'd say it needs like 15 or 20 dimensions.
yeah, right. And so, like, there's so many different factors that come into mind when you have to think about like how you fit into a political whatever,
Yeah.
right? And so like at the end of the day, socially, I'm like right in the smack dab center of left and right. Like I socially speaking, like I do generally believe that some form of socialized healthcare wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but I also don't think 100% socializing it is a bad
Now,
is a
100% is a barrier because it creates a
yeah,
monopoly.
yeah,
I'd say the way you Americans think about, when I say you Americans, I mean your leader, the leadership thinks about healthcare is it's bad. They don't
yeah,
understand European healthcare.
yeah,
They always take France or UK as an example and never take the United Kingdom as an example for healthcare.
yeah, right. I think that the best solution would be to be something like Denmark, right?
Germany, Denmark, all of those.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just like frustrating because like a lot of people don't. It's ultimately the whole like post-truth thing that I was mentioning before, right? Like we live in a society where people only want to hear what they want to hear, or people believe what they want to hear, right? And so when that gets stuck in your head, that's how you perceive it, right? And rather than having an open discussion, you're easy and prone to just yelling about it and saying stuff about it, right? Like it's weird because like in the US, you have like you have oh like you brought up democratic social like Bernie Sanders is a very like he's a populist, right?
Yeah.
And he ran under the flag of democratic socialism, right? He
Yeah.
wanted to bring some sort of changes to welfare. He wanted to bring changes to how like empowering the individual, right? And he was a populist, right? But at the same time, people saw that and would be like, he's a socialist. He's
So
bad.
I'd say he's a socialist, but not all his ideas are bad.
Yeah, not all of his ideas are bad, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, some of them are very like utopian and
Some of like his economic, I'd say he doesn't understand economics, but apart from that, he seems like a nice guy. He's a guy I would like to grab a drink with.
yeah, exactly, right? So, like at the end of the day, I'm just sort of sitting here like I don't really like it's weird how like any semblance of socialism is inherently bad. Like it's like people defending like corporations. Like I've seen people unironically defend corporations, being like, "Oh, that's how business works," or like,
No,
"Oh, these."
I hate that. See, I'm a textbook capitalist. I've profited out of. I'll be honest. I profited out of war. I profited out of kids getting addicted to cigarettes.
Yeah.
But see, but my take on corporates is corporates by design are supposed to be evil. And a government by design is supposed to stop corporates from doing stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. So like that's see like my big thing is that I want to so like my ideal sort of ideology for like economic stuff is that so I would argue that I'm like libertarian, I guess is the best way to put it. Um I'm a very like do with whatever the fuck you want, but I also want there to be as little government as possible. But at the same time, if there is a government, because I do think a government is necessary to make sure that a society is running, I do want that government to be responsible for ensuring that corporations don't get too large. And if they do get too large, they're able to break them up. See, that's sort of just the one thing I want. And somehow that is bad, or maybe that makes me a socialist.
See, that depends with who you talk to. Like, I'll
Yeah.
be honest. Like, someone to like. So one thing I state that I'm a neoliberal capitalist,
Yeah. So.
which result in someone saying we can't be friends because you're a capitalist. I'm like, or my personal favorite. You bloody like this is quite common here. You capitalist. Over here, the word capitalist is an insult. It's like back in the day, Americans used to call each other commies to imply that they're not loyal to the state.
Yeah.
That's you being called a capitalist over here.
Yeah, I legitimately think it's funny how much people try to like desperately label themselves on the political compass, and I think it's just like it's fun sort of seeing people sort of justify where they are, right? Like I guess yeah, socially I guess you could argue that I'm like libertarian. I don't really give a shit, right? If you want to legalize weed, go for it. I don't really give a shit. Just make sure you're not doing it while driving, right? I'm very pro firearm. I kind of am okay. I'm pretty okay with closed borders. abortion is kind of like whatever to me. I prefer legalizing it so that people
Nah,
don't
see,
hurt
I'd
themselves.
say when it comes to abortion, it's a personal take. Would I, would
Yeah,
I, would I abort my child? No. But would I preach to someone else about them not aborting their child? No, it's their life, it's their kid.
yeah. So
No,
no, I
I,
definitely get that.
no, the thing about abortion in the States is the polls are misleading. I can't do
Yeah,
a story on that. The thing is, are you pro or anti-abortion? So let's say someone comes to me and asks me a question, would you abort your child? I'll say no. But
yeah.
if they ask me saying, would you want legislator which stops women from aborting their kids? I'll say no. That's her right. She has the right to choose. It's her body.
I mean, that's. I mean, isn't that pretty much every single? Isn't that every like poll or every single like conversation that people want to have or sort of? That's just the way that like polls are though, right? Like you have a manipulative sort of way of introducing it to people, and how you word it is essentially the way you
Yeah,
uh
yeah.
get people.
Trust me. I'm from India. We specialize in that shit.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have every university has an annual report which it's more of an employment report which the government uses to advertise said university.
Yeah, yeah.
Most of it is
Yeah.
fair. Most of it is bullshit.
Hmm.
But it's designed in such a way that when you read it, you're like, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So, like for example, my one of my cousins went to uni where the employment rate is 100%.
Right. Right.
I don't know about you, but that's not possible.
Yeah, that isn't fucking possible.
So what they do is they have like an internal mechanism where if your grades are below a certain level, you're not part of the statistics.
Yeah, man. Don't you love information? Don't you love how people can be manipulated by information? Oh man.
That's actually the equivalent of my minor. My major is electronics and communications. My minor is this. In a way, if you can call it a minor. Like I specialize in data analytics, or if you want to be too icky about what I exactly do, data manipulation.
Yeah.
Like one of my university professors, he used to work for the Indian government. Like most of the data we give is bullshit. That's what he told me. A nice guy. He taught my mom as well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And the funny thing is, I didn't know that till I went to uni, and I was in his class.
Huh. Nice.
So we got talking. I said, and my mom went to uni over here, and like her name, and I told him her name is like, oh, you're her daughter. So apparently, my mom was called the tall one.
It's funny because like since my brother and my sister are so my brother is 8 years older than me and my sister is 10 years older than me. It was
Okay.
really funny.
Okay, that's an average Asian family.
Yeah,
My sister's about 9 years younger than me.
yeah. It was sort of interesting going into like what is it, like AP Psych when I was in high school, and then like they just asked me, "Are you related to Noona's Noona?" And then I was just like looking at him like, I can't believe you remember her after a full fucking decade, dude. But good job, I guess.
See,
Yes,
the thing is, if they like their students, they're gonna remember them. For example, this guy, like the last time he taught my mom was about 30 years ago. Remembers everything.
That's cool. I mean, I've never taught. I mean, actually, no, that's a lie. I have taught people, right? I've tutored people, but like that doesn't change the fact that like I don't think there's a situation where I'd remember a student's name after like, or I don't know how teachers feel about remembering certain students. Like, do they remember every student every year, or do they remember the ones that stick out like and do well in their classes? I mean,
I'd say they remember the students that stick out, but not exactly those who do well in class.
Yeah.
To be honest, I was in a way in the bottom end of my class. But all my professors will remember me due to one simple thing. I ask questions.
Yeah, that's fair.
And
right? Like,
and from their perspective, I'm smart, but I didn't really want to memorize it.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair.
Because what we learned in uni, most of it was outdated.
Yeah, that's valid.
But when I say outdated, I mean stuff that they used back in World War II. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I can see it's a little outdated.
No, it's more of like the thing is, everyone likes to talk about the military-industrial complex. But what people tend to forget is other countries have their own versions of the military-industrial complex, and we have one which I like to refer to as the education-industrial complex. So you create a system where universities are controlled by monopoly. That is the Indian government. Most of the good ones are government universities. Nothing inherently wrong with that, but the issue that comes up with is that it's in the government's best interest to advertise the universities as good.
Yeah.
And it creates a loop where parents want the kids to go to the best universities. Nothing wrong with that. Perfectly acceptable. And that in turn,
in America as well.
Now that in turn creates a system where parents want to get their kids into university at any cost. And it's reached a point where the same shit's been reiterated over and over again, because anytime the government wants to, let's say, get educational reform, there'll be a protest in New Delhi, our capital. Tuition centers have reached a point where they control they hold the Ministry of Education by the balls.
Oh yeah.
Because I remember back when I was in high school. We had something called English listening.
English listening?
Yeah. So the biggest issue about the Indian Indians and when it came to education was we weren't good with speaking or listening English as language.
Right.
So it was a verbal. We had a listening test, as in I read something out, then we listen, we write what we heard, or something like that, something along those lines. My batch was the first batch that got more or less an experimental batch. They cancelled the program even before it got off its feet due to protests in New Delhi. When I say protests, the BLME is nothing. That's it. Those are Indian protests.
Yeah. Huh.
For example, once CNN managed to come report, CNN had the opportunity to report on what an Indian protest is, and you should have seen them.
Kind of wish there were more protests about education in the U.S. I don't know.
So think about protests about education in India. They protest to keep it the same. They want the same old shit to be.
That's true, right?
Which has created a process where what my parents learned in uni, the same shit we learned in uni.
I mean, it creates a population that might not necessarily, that just is going to create a population where no one is going to really progress, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's frustrating, right?
And the funny thing is, my dad still remembers all stuff. Yeah, did they teach you this stuff? Yes. He's haven't they updated? I'm no.
The U.S.'s education policies have definitely changed, because obviously what my dad learned. Actually, no, he's not even American. He's not from the U.S. So what my brother learned and how they learned calculus and pre-calc and all sorts of stuff was not the same way that I learned it, right? And then when I look at back in I think 2015, the year after I left high school, I remember they changed up the education system again, and I think it was called Common Core. And they essentially had it so that the way that they were learning was a lot more. It was meant to be more for mental math, or at least it was supposed to build up the idea of mental math inside of a student's head. So if you're doing 14 plus 27, right?
Yeah.
You would break that down into okay, 14 plus 20 is 34 plus 7.
I don't think you do it that way. Yeah,
right.
That's not the fastest way, but I get what you're saying.
Right. But I feel that's a very backwards way to teach students, and that's it's sort of interesting to see how that has changed and how that is how older generations react to it, because pretty much once I got out of high school, right, and we saw once I was teaching it, and once I also talked to people who are also teaching it, it was just wow, this is fucking stupid. Why are we teaching it like this? This feels almost counterproductive, and I feel this actually makes it harder to understand basic addition or basic English.
I understand that take, but see, the thing about the Indian educational system is it's ancient. It's what the Brits left us with when they packed this stuff and went went back to their island in 1947.
You
Same
ever
old
think about
shit.
leaving? You ever think about leaving India?
Yeah, considered it. I might or might not. The thing is, you know how many Indians want to leave the country, right?
That's true.
It's,
Having met many Indian people and having several Indian friends, yeah,
I kind of get that.
every Indian's dream is to leave the country. Yes, in a way, like, I'm not really into, I'm not obsessed about leaving the country. Unlike certain people.
Yeah.
I'm fine with this change. It's just that I have my reservations with certain things, and I'm not happy with, I'll be happy if those things are addressed.
I mean, that's fair, right? Like, isn't that like everyone, right? Everyone
Mm.
feels a certain way about their country, about how certain things should be changed. But if they do like living there, right, they're ultimately going to deal with those things. Like, the proud, patriotic, overwhelming American.
And
right?
I won't call myself a proud, patriotic, overwhelming Indian, but yeah, I would like my country to improve.
Yeah, no, same here, right? Like in this, like I live. What is it? I love the U.S., right? I love what the U.S. stands for. I love, what the U.S. is built on, right? But at the same time, like there's plenty. There are massive problems that the U.S. has, right? Major problems the U.S. has, both on an infrastructure level, right, at a political level, on a social level, or on an economic level, right? And I think that and even though those problems exist, I would never give up living here for like anything else, right? So I don't know.
No, I'd say that the true the truest way I found patriotism is acknowledging the flaws and fixing it.
Yeah, 100%, right?
Nah, because many people here, not like over here, there's like this idea that if you criticize the government, you're not a patriot.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's really bad over here.
Yeah, no, I totally understand, right? Because like there's a lot of people who are, and that just happens to come along with like any country that has like a massive amount of nationalism, right? Because at the end of the day, I consider myself a very moderate individual, right? And I can obviously say that like too much and like having some level of nationalism is good, but when you get too far, right, you become blind to the problems that your overall country is doing, right? You become blind to the nation, right? But it's okay, and it's okay to have a little less nationalism, right? But then you go too far, and then you run into America's problem, where like nobody cares about their country, right? Or nobody.
No, think about the thing about the Americans is like when 2001 happened, no one is
Operation Desert Storm.
Yeah, before not Desert Storm. The Desert Storm was not. I was before that. I mean the invasion of before the invasion of Afghanistan. That specific word is keyed by Google by YouTube, so I don't want to say it.
Oh shit! Yeah.
Yeah. So the guys who did, but under the assumption that America will crumble from the inside. Like I know because I spent most of my childhood in that region. I know how they think. So they were under the assumption that the states will collapse on itself.
Yeah.
Because according to them, the states lack patriotism.
Yeah.
But what happened was, all of you the Americans band together. They fought back. So I'd say that the idea of American patriotism is different from what the rest of the world considers.
Yeah, but I think that, but despite that, right, 20 years later, you probably don't really see the same enthusiasm in this.
I'd say it's more of the Americans are bored. I mean, you people are bored. You miss the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Right.
You miss the good old days when you had a rival to fight.
The same. We want to pine for each other before we go off for all out nuclear war. No.
And despite what some people say, Russia ain't the Soviet Union. It ain't the same.
It's not, right? And people want to go for China again.
China's like a toxic ex. Okay, on and off relationship. It ain't the same as the Soviets.
Yeah, I get that. I think U.S. nationalism is weird because it varies from time to time, and like I think 9/11 was sort of interesting in the sense that like it did band people together, and people were a lot more like the military industrial complex of the U.S. was essentially revitalized with people signing up to go strike back at the baddies, right? And then you fast forward 20 years later, but like most people I know who are actual veterans are pretty like jaded, right? They all feel, and obviously this is all anecdotal, right?
Yeah,
It's
see,
not as if, like,
like I understand that. Thing about conflict is, it's not like I'm like, see, back in, let's say, my grandparents' generation, service was quite common. India had a war every 5 years, 5 to 10 years,
yeah,
and
yeah,
most of them have told me one simple thing: there's no glory in battle.
yeah. There is no glory in battle, right? And like the U.S. ended up like there's a joke about how wars in the Middle East are just like it's just a forever war, right? We were at war with Afghanistan for what, like 17 fucking years
Close to
longer?
20, but yeah.
Yeah, close to 20, right? And it's like quote unquote officially been over as of maybe like last year last year when we all did the weird ass pullout game of Afghanistan where we kind of left all our tech with them and now Afghanistan.
Okay, so the like thing is, how I put. So I kind of became an expert in Afghanistan because the Indian government was trying to move in, but thanks to those guys, it didn't happen. But I'd say the tech you left is minimal at best.
Yeah,
No, nothing too affair. The Americans
I
and
guess so.
the American government in that way was smart. They knew they didn't want to make the same mistake the Soviets did. So what they left the Afghans with is ain't that useful.
Yeah, but I mean, it's probably easier to deal with rusty AKs than it is, you know, probably better, more modernized hardware, I guess. I mean, it's like leaving, but it still is like a leg up, is like what I'm trying to get. Like if we're talking about like pure war games, right? Like any advantage you give the enemy is not necessarily.
Yeah, that's them.
So, right, like it's just sort of like a questionable decision from like Biden's administration, and that's not. I mean, obviously, like that's a whole can of worms, but
Yeah, it's kind of
like,
worms on its own.
but there is like a fatigue when it came to the overall war, right? And now, like now that we're out of Afghanistan, right, and I feel as if like U.S. nationalism is almost at an all-time, not an all-time low, but it is pretty like
It's pretty low, but that's a what.
it's
No. So from my understanding with American nationalism, it has its ups and downs.
yeah,
It's
and
never
like
truly gone.
all you see on the internet nowadays is just people fucking complaining about everything that the government has done or everything that whatever. And it's not as if people want to fight for like their country, because it's not really their country, because people have just realized that America's kind of just run by whatever produces them like the most resources or money,
To be honest,
right?
isn't that every government?
That's every government, right?
It's
So like
it's not exclusively an
Americans have
American problem. That's it's an issue with the concept of a government.
it's the concept of nationalism, right? It's just any, or nationalism being broken, right? Because I mean, like that's essentially like why like World War I and World War II were such like important wars in the overall like social thinking, the collective consciousness of nationalism. It's the reason why like the postmodern movement was really like important, right? Because if you think about it, like if you read books like All Quiet on the Western Front, right, there's this whole obsession with like young students, young kids going to war, trying to serve trying to serve and fight for their country, only for it to come back with completely empty, jaded, traumatized, and so on and so forth. And like nowadays, while America does sort of have that, more America was stereotyped as that, like, yeah, I'd fight for my country kind of shit. You end up having a situation where people nowadays, like, what they're fighting for is never like a greater cause. It's never for it's not for a nation. It would be for themselves, right? Which is
Yeah.
why, like, I guess that's also like one of the reasons why civilian gun ownership is sort of unique in a sense. Like, if a country ever tried to invade the U.S., which that'd be really fucking hard. Right?
I doubt it. I doubt that would happen.
Yeah, I doubt it. I doubt it. Like it would be really difficult to do for one, and two, I really doubt that something like that would happen in like modern age. But I mean, who knows? But like you end up having a bunch of smaller communities that would band together to essentially fight for what they are, but they wouldn't fight for something higher than that. They wouldn't fight for a nation. They'd be just fighting for the smaller communities that they've essentially have formed together.
I'd say that itself on its own is enough.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's people you love, right? And
Yes.
that's the concept of the nation is not politicians or politics. It's the people that you identify with. It's the people that you form a community with. It's the people
Exactly.
you find bonds with. So, Yeah, it's like a weird sort of situation with American nationalism, and it does have its ups and downs. But like but it is also sort of interesting seeing how other nations do it, right? I mean, South Korea is a very proud nation, right? They like South Korea will pride and applaud anyone who sort of exhibits South Korean like representation outside of the nation, right?
I'd say that's common among most, if not all, Asian nations.
Yeah, yeah. Like a lot of Asian countries are very nationalistic, right? With the extremes being like China, right? Japan probably being the least nationalistic out of
See,
all of
think
them.
about
Their
Japanese
politics.
national. I'll disagree with you on that. Think about Japanese nationalism as it's unique. It's there. They're extremely nationalistic, but not in the militaristic sense.
Yeah, in an economic sense, most likely.
Yeah, in
Right? 'Cause they
economic and
are
social
like,
sense.
yeah, right.
Like
'Cause,
back in when was it, the 1990s, when they had their own bubble. Japanese nationalism at its worst.
yeah. So I get it, right? So I think like yeah, East Asian nationalism is. I mean, not even East Asian, just Asian
Asian
nationalism.
nationalism as a whole.
Yeah, right. Like there is a whole like love for their country, love for their own nation that doesn't really exist in other parts in like western parts of the world. And it's sort of weird to see how that like the death of like group identity, the death of like love for nation, the death of nationalism in the West has become sort of like
Nah,
a
I'd say the
prevalent.
death of nationalism in the West would have occurred if not for Ukraine.
Yeah, that's fair, right? But I feel like is Ukraine really considered the West? Is it?
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
is.
it's like
It's part of the like. Okay, when I say the West, maybe I'm just restricting it to Europe.
yeah, but I guess like when it comes to Europe, I also think of the West as exclusively everything that was on the side of like West Germany to the west of that, and like everything to the east is like East Asia, not East Asia, East Europe, right? I
Okay, so
guess like
now think about Eastern Europe, as most of it could be considered the West right now.
yeah, no, for sure, right? And even then, like you still have like Nordic countries, right? Like Switzerland and like the Netherlands
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and like that's technically considered the West. So like maybe I'm just putting borders and making them up as I
Yeah,
go
just drawing a
along.
line.
I mean, at this point, like I think here's the thing that like most people can realize if they talk to me. I like to pretend that I know what I'm talking about. I pretend that I speak words that seem intelligent, all right? Schizo philosophy, schizopolitics, if you will, and then it turns into I actually have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm just making things up as I go along.
So far you made a lot of sense, so that's something.
Yeah.
I'd say
It's,
that the entire issue right now is the West needed a reason, and Russia gave it to them.
yeah.
Like,
It's
and I'd say the idea of West, like how I put nationalism over here is, most Asian countries, from my perspective, is just collectivism.
yeah, yeah.
As I might have mentioned earlier, I did my schooling in the Middle East, and their idea of nationalism is more of family structures.
Yes.
So it's their clan. That's it. That's what matters for them. I'd say it's like the midway between what the West sees as acceptable and what the East sees as acceptable.
Yeah.
But the issue with such a system is stability is pretty rare.
Yeah.
Due to the fact that clans fight among themselves on the basis of for the benefit of my clan.
Right. So, and I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like, I mean, okay. So, like, it's interesting thinking about that. Like, how you mentioned like collectivism and how there is a lot of infighting, right? And so like America is always viewed as like a very individualistic country, right? Like, which is funny because it's still a very collectivist.
Yeah,
country,
I was gonna say
right?
that.
Right. But like instead of being for a nation or even a state, it's just your own community, right? But so it is always interesting seeing like the differences of people how people view like the individualism in America being like all about self-expression or all about being yourself or how you express yourself to the world, right? Whether it be with clothing, your sexuality, your gender, or whatever tattoos you have, and so on and so forth. And obviously, a lot of that's been commoditized into like products you wear, right? But like you go over to Japan, and like a lot of people you consider like a lot of East Asian nations, whether it be China, Korea, Japan, right, as very collectivist nations that none of them actually.
Extremely.
Go ahead. Yeah, extremely, right? Like a lot of them don't care enough about like self-expression. It's always about, you never act out in public because you want to be respectful for the people around you. Right? And I mean to a degree.
And to be honest, I've seen the dark side of such a system.
Yeah.
Like, think about this over here. Like, many people have told me I'd agree with me because we're part of the same group. I'm like, go fuck yourself. That's my answer. Go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
You're supposed to listen to me because I'm older than you, and we're part of the same clan. Go fuck yourself. I don't give a rat's ass about a clan or a family or any of that shit.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Like, for me, it's my parents and my sister. That's it. I don't care much about anyone else.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, right? I think like there's like a weird obsession with like you gotta respect your elders. You gotta, you have to, there's a lot of like rules of respect that have essentially been established.
Yeah, the thing is, like, I respect my grandma because, okay, sure, some of her ideas are primitive to say the very least, but there's no reason for me to disrespect her. But you have a random asshole you've never met in your life who just happens to, be part of the same bloodline as you.
Yeah. No, I mean that's I guess that's like a mentality on it nowadays, right? Like I don't care who you are, right? Like the saying, right? Your actions speak louder than words has always essentially rung true with me since I entered university, right? Your respect is not gained because you said something, right? Your respect is gained because you are something, because you went out of your way to be a better person, right? A lot of people
Exactly.
like if you reach out to someone who is in distress, they'll respect you not because they'll respect you not necessarily because you say you're a good person, but because you actively acted as a good person, right?
Exactly.
So it's just like the differences between that. Like if I meet like an old person from Korea that I've never met before, I really probably won't fucking treat them any differently than I would a stranger in whatever, right? People are just people to me, right? People are numbers. um, right? And only the people that I know actually have any sort of impact or any sort of, will or not will, but like any sort of like reason for me to like care about them or respect them. And even then, it can like turn the other way. People can do stupid things or bad things, right? Like people can get hooked onto like hard drugs and can't break away from it. And then and your respect can go down. So it's just like, I don't know, man. Like respect is a weird thing, and I also
And the thing is, one thing I've seen is in a system of, let's say, a hierarchy and respect, how I put this, corruption is pretty easy to come across.
Yeah.
Because what happens is you have a person who's never had power in their life.
Right.
And once they climb up the totem pole,
it goes to their head.
Yeah, it goes there, and it's not like they climbed up due to their own skill or anything of that sort.
Yeah. And I think like it's frustrating because like I don't know, man. I just want like tradition. I feel like that's the part of like conservatism and traditionalism that like I want to break away from. Like I want people to sort of, or at least older folk, or because like I don't know, like my mom drives me up a fucking wall, right? Like I think she's a real fucking piece of work. She doesn't remember like jack shit. She is constantly like kind of making things up, right? But and so like she won't even remember the own things, some of the things that she says. But like we recently got into a screaming match a few months back about like housing, right? And then she
wants you to buy a house. Let me guess. She wants you to buy a house.
She wants to buy a house for me, right?
Okay.
Instead of me like renting, so that I can
Okay. Yeah, I know where this is going. Right.
Yeah, right. And then we got into a screaming match because like so she needed to we needed to get a loan, right? So my mom, she is telling me like I need you to contact the real estate agent like that we're working with who is showing you these homes so that we can get started on the process of like getting this home going, right? And then she tells me like, hey, the fucking reason why like we got into an argument was so fucking stupid, right? So I went to an open house, right? I liked the place and I was like, okay, I'd like to see if I can try to get this place. So my mom tells me go contact the real estate agent. He would be, but like we still had to get pre-approved for a loan, right? And it turns out that the loan broker that we went to was the real estate agent's wife. So she tells me you should tell the real estate agent that you like this place despite it being sold, because right now we're in a seller's market in the real estate thing, right? So like I went to the open house and 8 hours later it was sold, right? Actually 4 hours later it was sold, right? So she's just like, okay, tell this guy that you're interested in this place so that he can tell his wife to get your loan pre-approved faster so that we can get the place even though it was already sold. So like the logic is like it's circular, it doesn't make sense. And like I'm just like, that's fucking stupid. I straight up just said like that is the stupid, like that's fucking stupid. Like
Noona, I'll tell you one thing about real estate. Doesn't make sense.
it doesn't
It doesn't make
like,
sense.
my mom, so like she was calling me on a Sunday, right? And it was just like, we got into a screaming match and whatever, and then we ended up with like, she was just like, oh, you called me dumb, you called me stupid, like you said fuck you to me, which I didn't. I just said that her plan was fucking stupid. And then we end the call with her being like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to like, I don't want to search for a home with like a home for you anymore. I'm like, okay, fine, like I'll deal with it. All right. And then she calls me a few days later after I contacted the real estate agent, like, hey, we don't need your service anymore. Like, thanks for everything. And my mom calls me going like, why did you say that? And then and then she goes into a whole lecture of, I'm your mother, you have to treat me with more respect. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. You weren't there in most of my life. You weren't like, you're not a person to me. Right. So I don't know. I just like, I mean, I know they got like really like personal right now, but like it is sort of one of those situations that I can look at and just I get really frustrated when people are very obsessive with like, you have to respect me because I'm older than you or because like I gave birth to you. Sorry, I didn't mean to like trauma dump, right?
Ah, it's okay. It's okay. I'd say think about your mother is she cares. From what I can tell, she cares. She cares about you.
Not really. I feel like she's just using it as a way to profit, right? And I feel like, and like, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms, right? Because I think we established like a price for rent at some point a few months ago, and yesterday, right, we were calling, and she goes, "All right, so the rent is going to be this amount, right?" And it's like significantly higher than before, and I'm like, "No, like that's not how this works. Like you said it yourself, right?" So it's just like one of those things where she's either forgetting what she says or intentionally trying to fuck me over, and like maybe that makes me sound paranoid, but it's like she's just a person I just don't trust. And
I'd say it depends on her age.
Yeah, she's 60.
Yeah, she's forgetting.
Yeah, early stage dementia.
Nah, see, my parents are in the mid-50s and they always start forgetting stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Like East Asian cultures with the whole obsession with respect for elders or not East Asian, just Asian cultures in general. Like every culture, really. Right? Elders, I don't know. They're just shitty people.
See, the thing is, no, you haven't reached the Indian part. The thing about Indian culture is it's a dick measuring contest between different branches of the family.
Yeah. No, I get that.
However, it kind of reminds me of a Mexican drug cartel. If I'm gonna be honest. Indian families are Mexican drug cartels. Minus the drugs.
That's very funny.
It's like wow, but it's a entire debate about is Koki getting married soon? My niece is married already. First of all, fuck off. Second of all, why do you need to know if I'm getting married? Why do you need to know my salary? And see, one thing is my parents are kind of like me in this case, I think.
Yeah.
So there's no argument on that side.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, if more people in your country were like you, I'm sure things would be a lot more different.
Things are changing. Like, sure, that's things good. Are shit. Like, I like to complain. But
for the better or for the worse?
Both.
Okay.
See, things are changing. I hope it goes in the right direction.
Yeah.
Because I haven't gotten into what I like to call the Game of Thrones of India, Indian politics.
I mean, isn't that politics in general? People just
American politics is extremely civilized compared to what we have here.
Nah.
Like, the equivalent of my state's governor his family runs the local crime syndicate.
Right.
His
organized crime and everything.
yeah, his sister is a well-known. She's a politician as well, and she's a well-known mass murderer.
Huh.
I don't know how many people she's decapitated, but I'm quite sure it's in the double digit.
Very admirable. That's who I want as a politician. Someone known for beheadings.
Okay, the funny thing is, okay, I don't want to get too deep into it because this is one thing that ticks them off, but I'll tell this to you off stream. It involves UAE intelligence, the Saudi foreign intelligence, and movie actors.
Mm.
That's all I can say because if I say anything more, he's gonna sue me. Defamation lawsuits in India is pretty weird.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because like, what is it? My fiance and I, we talk about like she mentions a lot of like East Asian stuff to me in general, right? Because she follows a lot of like K-pop, so it's like a lot of like her following like the industry and stuff, right? And I was mentioning stuff about like, oh, like I don't understand why this girl doesn't like sue, right? Because like legally, like she would technically be in the right. And obviously, I don't know whatever like contract is being dealt with, right? But then she like we talk about how like suing culture doesn't really exist in like East Asia. In
No, suing culture doesn't exist in India unless it's defamation.
Yeah. So like American suing culture is apparently like really fucking massive.
Yeah, apparently. So it's massive even for the West. Like, so I used to volunteer in a kindergarten, and my boss was British. She used to bitch about the American suing culture. Like, I'm scared to sit next to a person because they might sue me. I'm like, is it really that bad?
That's a little like.
But then again, she's British, so you know that entire British American.
British people
thing, which I find funny because you guys get along a lot, but you don't admit it.
No, for sure. It's like tsunderes at that point. Right?
Yeah.
I think I just like making fun of British people just because like I think there's a few things about British people that are like really weird. I don't know. But like that's besides the point. I think like American suing culture is really fucking funny to me, just because like I have met because it really is also just like something that you only deal with if you're rich, right? If you have the money for it, because like you have to buy a lawyer, right? Or you have to hire a lawyer, and that's really expensive. So even if you get the money from this case that from a suing case that you win, right, the money that you get back will probably just go back to the lawyer.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. It's just like funny to think about. It's just like, because I know this one girl and she comes from a really, really well-off family, right? And then it turns out like whenever she bitched at me about people that she's met, she's just like, oh, like it's just like I can fucking sue them, and I'm like,
do it.
I mean, okay, do it, I guess, right?
No, so think about suing here. It's used for two things. One is defamation. Second thing is, if you want to take a company out, a small company out, you want to take them to the back and shoot them in the head, sue them.
Yeah.
Take them to court. But the catch is, even you'll be caught in legal proceedings for the next 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
Think about Indian courts, it's extremely slow. When I say slow, like I'll give an example. Like, so India had its own version of the JFK killings. When was Rajiv Gandhi killed? Okay, our Prime Minister was Rajiv Gandhi. He was assassinated in my state, of all places. We were famous for that. He was killed in 1991.
I feel like I've heard about this.
It wasn't a shooting, it was a suicide bomber.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine from Bhutan, and she mentions that, like Bhutan and India are fairly close.
No, it's an open border. There's a running joke. It's a joke, okay, for anyone who's Bhutanese, that Bhutan's just a state of India, which is officially a different country.
I mean, in the same vein that like Jersey is the armpit of America.
But I'd say we're more close than that.
Yeah.
Because all I need is a passport. I don't need a visa or anything. I can just walk into Bhutan.
Right. So I think like one of the things that makes so she mentions that like she knows like the royal family in like Bhutan and stuff like that. So it is sort of interesting like hearing about some Bhutanese like history and how that sort of correlates, and a lot of it has to do with India. So who knows? I feel like it's all cyclical at that point.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, there were 8 perpetrators, and they were supposed to be hanged.
Hmm.
So the entire thing became a shit show, and they didn't hang them. If you ask me, just hang them immediately, get the job done. Now send a message. Nope. They said. In fact, the worst thing is, one of the perpetrator's daughters, we paid for her MBA. We paid for her university. I'm like, why the fuck are we paying for some scumbag's daughter's university? I mean, see, Indian foreign policy is weird. And one thing, we bring fire and brimstone. From the other hand, we're like, you know what? We have to be more humane.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, imagine, I'm just going to use this call, son, Geronimo. You guys killed Geronimo, okay? Good.
Yeah.
He deserved it. But what if you guys suddenly felt guilty? No, imagine you guys, before you killed him, like before you even found out where he was, you find his daughter, and you're like, you know what, we should be nice to her, and you take her, you pay her Harvard education. Would the American public be cool with that?
Yeah, that'd be a little fucking questionable at best.
Yeah, extremely questionable.
Oh, Fuji's here.
Oh, he's here?
Yeah, hello.
He's over. Doesn't he have uni to Fuji, go to bed.
Wait, what time is it over there for you? I mean,
it's 11:23.
Isn't it 11:23 for Fuji as well? Or?
Yeah, so he has to go to bed.
Okay. Yeah. I will actually have to start heading out in about like 10 minutes or so, if that's okay.
Sure. We can end it in, let's say, 5.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, but I think it's funny seeing like the similarities and like the differences between American and Indian culture, because like, you know, to be perfectly, I have known a lot of Indian Americans in my life, but I don't know too much about India myself, right? So
see, thing about India is,
other than
even the Indians don't know much about India, because it's
states.
Now each state is a country on its own.
Yeah.
Like, say, for example, here I can sit and bitch about the government. The worst they'll do is the crime law will do is sue me. You won't kill me in my city. You won't kill me here. However, let's say if I'm a more rural city in this state, I'm a dead person walking.
Right.
Or on some states, there's a state that's basically Afghanistan.
I hope your walls are soundproofed.
I mean, the thing about my neighborhood is everyone bitches about everyone else, so it's fine.
Yeah. What is it? Do you live in a room where, like, you know, people? Have you heard your neighbors bitch about you? Like, you know.
So they don't bitch about me. Rather, they bitch about the prime minister. That's a pretty common thing over here.
Right.
There's that. There's like, see, they tend to bitch about their own wives and husbands. Which is a pretty fun thing over here. So what happens is alcoholism is a problem in my state, which it was caused by the state government, which is a stream on its own.
Yeah.
So it's common for a wife to beat up her husband for coming home drunk. When I say coming home drunk, I don't mean like shit-faced drunk. I mean like he doesn't even know he's there.
Yeah. I mean, I get that, right? I mean, I feel like that's a very, because like India is sort of industrializing right now, right? Like I'd argue, because like
I'd say we're more of post-industrialization by now.
Yeah.
We were industrializing back in the 90s, but now it's more of quote unquote IT.
Right. So back in like American history, right? Like before Prohibition, we had the whole industrialization era, right? And like as soon as factories were set up, as soon as like labor became like a massive job market in the U.S., right? We ended up having a situation where like most of the population were like alcohol,
Okay. So over here, it's the exact opposite. It's a cause of cause of unemployment and welfare systems. So what happened was we had a politician and an actress. Of course, they're all actors over here. Like, I'd say the only good politician who happened to be an actor would be Ronald Reagan. Like, okay, there are a few more I can think of, but mostly actors tend to be bad politicians.
Fuck Ronald Reagan. He banned fully automatic guns.
Yeah, you could say that, but I'm saying that it could have been worse.
Yeah, he could have been worse, right? Like people really like Ronald Reagan, but he was also. I have like okay, boomers really like Ronald Reagan, but he's also one of the presidents that actually still caused like massive amounts of issues in the US.
Yeah. Isn't he the guy who said crack to the inner cities?
Yeah, what is it? He was the one that essentially caused the massive crime wave in the beginning of the 90s with the war on drugs. He's the one that essentially, like, he is because of the war on drugs, right? That's the CIA essentially funded themselves with cocaine, right? Marijuana essentially was cracked down, massive crime wave, banning fully automatic guns. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like socially, you end up creating.
I said he's a good politician, not a good person.
That's fair. Right. So I mean, at the end of the day, like Ronald Reagan was beloved by many, but hated by me.
No, he's beloved by many and hated by many.
Yeah, he's probably. I mean, there's also Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was
Schwarzenegger. He seemed like a nice guy, but politician, not that great. Personal take on it.
That's fair. Right.
See, some people may be good leaders, but they're not good politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, slight background static according to 4G. Let me take a look from my end.
Oh.
I think it should be fine now.
Alright.
Oh yeah, so what happened was there was one politician who came up with the brilliant idea of, you know what, if I give people free shit, they'll vote for me.
Yeah.
And that shit, when I say free shit, I don't mean like healthcare and public welfare and anything of that sort. I mean
like free materialistic goods.
I mean televisions, mobile smartphones, laptops.
Yeah.
Food was subsidized to the point where you can get a meal for 3 rupees. Let me just convert that to USD, and I can get a subsidized meal for 3 rupees if I go to one of these stores. So that's 3.9 cents.
Huh.
Yeah. So you reached a point where people have money, and then the politicians go around giving free money. That's every politician's key to win. So you have people, and it pays to be poor, in my state at least, due to all this welfare.
Yeah.
So you get free shit.
I feel like any politician that begins bribing people with free stuff is bound to be a shit politician.
All of them. In that case, I'll say all Indian politicians are shit politicians.
Yeah.
But it's reached a point where everyone gets free stuff. So we have poor people with a lot of money, and they don't know what to do. And along with that, the state government starts. The state government needs money to fund all their free stuff program. They take a loan from the central government. The central government tells them, "Amigo, no more money, because these guys aren't going to pay back their loans anytime soon." And the funny thing is, the state governments maintain a monopoly on alcohol distribution. The central government maintains a monopoly on arms and cigarette distribution.
Interesting.
So what you need money to you need money to fund your welfare program. So what do? Get the people drunk, get them addicted on your shit, and then you provide them more stuff, thereby them getting more addicted on your stuff.
Yeah, okay.
In a way, the biggest drug cartel in my state is my state's government.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. Like that's essentially like the CIA and like cocaine, right? So,
I'd say it's worse than CIA and cocaine because the CIA had vision. They had vision.
Yeah.
These guys, it's reached a point where it's turned into an arms race between the two men. It's actually a two-party state.
I mean, like you said, it's a dick measuring contest.
It's more than a dick measuring contest. It's a survival contest.
Yeah.
It's like each party can only survive if they increase their welfare. They're like, you know what? I'll give you more free stuff, and people get free stuff. Like for example, there was one politician, another actor, because of course he's an actor. It's a good thing he didn't win because his policies were shit. His entire agenda could fit into like one paragraph. When I read, he was pretty new to politics. So his entire thing was give 32,000 rupees to 20 to 30,000 rupees, 20 to 30,000 rupees per month for every housewife. So how much is that?
That's
20,000 is $262, and 30,000 is $393, and that's actually a pretty good salary over here.
That is, yeah, that sounds pretty solid for like India.
So it's like with that thing you can be top 10% of the population.
Huh.
So I'm
I'm
like,
assuming that didn't work out.
yeah, it didn't work out due to the fact that he doesn't have the support of the establishment.
Right.
But his plan, like how I put this in terms that won't be offensive. It's fucking stupid. I don't know if I don't know what sort of shit he's been spoken, but that's fucking stupid.
Cookie, you're gonna get sued now for defamation.
Nah, I didn't say his name, so it could be anyone because all of them have proposed something similar.
Right, you're right. You haven't named anyone. Alright.
I haven't named anyone. All I said was actor and welfare programs where they give free money. That's like all of them, so could be any of them. It could be any of them.
It's funky that you have to walk on eggshells with pretty much anything. Because here, like, bashing politicians or like, shit talking politicians seems to be like the average thing to do pretty much every single day. So
Yeah, so
anyway.
the reason I'm being extra careful now is because one of the politicians got kind of itchy when someone else called him out for money laundering. So he sent a cease and desist letter.
Right.
Which doesn't make things seem any better because if someone accuses you of something, just ignore it.
Yeah.
Don't number one of politics. Don't
What
be
are
like.
you gonna do? Sue me again? Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll end it here now.
Yeah.
It was nice having you on.
Of course. I mean, I can continue to talk and on and on and on about, I guess, American isms, I guess. So.
I would love to have you on later on as well. Some other time.
It'd be fun to do this again.
Cool. Anyway, I'll end it now. Thanks a lot, chat. And I think we'll end it now.
Yep.
3, 2, 1.
All right.
No, you're still